Want to introduce myself. Hello, Andrew McRoberts. I'm with Sands Anderson in Richmond, and we've been acting as the county attorney, city attorney for the last, I guess, month or so. This is my second planning commission meeting, but I don't think I appeared or said anything in the first one, so you may have missed it.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
We do try to keep you busy, so look forward to that. Welcome. Strange process question. Which is, I guess, what I do. I have a request to clarify something that didn't happen, which is hard for me procedurally. There is a public perception that a planning commissioner violated our bylaws, and my understanding is that that didn't happen. How does one say this not thing?
Do you need to respond to a message?
This is the request that I've been getting.
Why don't we work with the attorney on the side? But I mean, it's just that you know there was no violation. It's straightforward. Do you want us to handle it for you?
This is my understanding. If you could, I think that would be helpful. That might be the best way to do it.
All right.
I'm in over my head, legally speaking.
Yeah, no need to go there.
This is beautiful, thank you. We are down Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Russell.
We do expect, Mr. Bob.
Great. And which counselors do we have?
Mr. Smith, Mr. Kingston, and Mr. King.
Great. I have my head in order. Apologies for the delay. Very procedurally complicated planning commission meeting for me. All right.
Hopefully with a few reminders, it was made a little bit simpler.
More manageable, not simpler. Welcome all. Thank you for coming. Do we have enough planning commissioners to start every meeting?
Yeah,
did.
Fantastic.
You do have the quorum.
That works for me. We have so much to talk about. Oh my God. So I just like to go run down the list here. Consent agenda. We've already had one thing pulled. Do we want to pull anything else from the consent agenda, or are we good with it as it stands?
We pulled 2005.
Correct.
We, well, for clarity, it was asked that that be put on the regular agenda, and there was no objection.
It was
So,
asked.
The applicant asked to have it on the regular agenda.
Okay.
Weird thing for not too fast.
I thought so.
Just wanted to make sure, the code
Procedurally.
has some language from procedures, and
Mm.
so that it wasn't a concern on our end, so we just made that happen.
This is an abundance of caution, noticing timing issue. They want to make sure that if there's a vote on it, that's a vote on it.
Let me turn on my microphone, watch your microphone, is that right? There we go. Sure, so, pertaining to 2005 JPA, we discovered following the meeting, last month that the ERB, there had been a miss in some of the advertisement for the code. And so we caught it in time to put it back on this agenda. So Mr. Warner is prepared to provide just a little summary of why it's on the agenda, as well as some technical information that will help with some of the concerns that we received from the community. And so that's one of the things that our chair was gonna kind of get the temperature of as to whether the group wanted to have a lengthy discussion or not, at least at this point, because it's likely that we'll be bumping up at 6 o'clock, and we have our hearing starting at 6 o'clock.
Gotcha. Okay.
On consent agenda, are we good with the consent agenda?
It's not super related to the ERB review, but I think when we talked about the Shake Shack drive-through, there was some talk of making the sidewalk into a shared use path because it's wide enough. Have you guys heard anything of the applicant of why they decided not to do that, or?
I don't know. Doesn't sound like Dannon's got any information.
I don't think there's
on
been
that.
any further discussion on that other than what was said at the public hearing.
Okay. And then, are they already approved for the final site plan outside of the ERB approval, or are they still going?
No, they're still under review. We're trying to get another comment letter out by the end of this week.
Okay.
How are we in the consent agenda? We okay on it? Mr. Duranzio, do you have a motion in mind for that one?
Sure.
That's exciting news.
Not right now.
No,
right now,
we're not at 5:30 yet.
When we were there.
I understand.
Fantastic.
or short of bodies, I will provide one.
You understand? 2005 JPA. We can go deep. We can go so deep on 2005 JPA. How deep do you want to go?
I
Not at
thought we
all.
did enough of a scuba dive last time.
Yeah.
Just those damn green panels. But people seem to like them, I guess, for some reason.
Well, I mean, unless we're gonna discuss the addition of gargoyles, I'm perfectly content to make it.
Mr. Warner, are there gargoyles in the office?
Fast as possible.
Jump the gun on it, Peggy. So, well. lay out
Microphone,
there-
Jeff, and short conversation.
Yeah, is the, you know,
Thank you.
it was, I made a mistake on the sign. I thought it was 7 days, but we have 10 days. But they, so that primarily why we re-advertised it, but we've also received multiple letters about, well, from the assumption that the COA had been approved, then they appealed to city council. But they'll have to do that again, following whatever you all do. So as far as I'm concerned, it's, could have been on consent agenda, just simply that we had to re-advertise. I don't think anything's changed, well, nothing's changed. And unless anybody's got something they'd like to revise from the prior conditions, I would, Missy has a copy and can read them, or however you wish to do it.
I think it would be helpful for the public once we get to that item, depending on where we are timing-wise, to have Mr. Warner just give a brief presentation about why it's come back so that there's less confusion. Give some of the highlights of some of the explanations for some of the concerns that have been received. And if you all are okay, then we've got a copy of last month's motion, if folks wanted to move forward with that, or we can have further discussion. It's completely up to you all.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to at least acknowledge some of the things that have been expressed and then offer a brief response. I mean, at least it's, no one can complain that they weren't acknowledged.
All right.
All the same thing that was before.
Thank you. Last call on 2005 JPA. Anything more to say on that for the pre-meeting? Hearing none. 1120 Avon, my understanding is that it is withdrawn. The public hearing will not be taking place. Am I understanding correct?
It is withdrawn. We have tried in the few hours in between to let folks who have been interested in this project know what occurred. We do anticipate that we'll have some people come virtually or in person or both or some combination. We're going to encourage those individuals, if they do want to speak, that we have matters from the public on our agenda that's open to anything that folks want to speak about except for the other hearing. But that there will, this action, both of these actions are gone. And we don't have anything to discuss on those specifically because they have been formally taken out. I don't mind explaining that process, or between the two of us, we can explain that process and so folks understand where it landed and if, what happens, how it could come back again. If there was interest there, we definitely want to communicate status so that people, have an explanation. There's so many people interested in this application, so.
When would that happen on the agenda?
We need to do that early in the agenda. I think we're gonna have to do that at a couple of places, probably right at the beginning, and then prior to the hearings.
You're thinking before reports?
Yes. So just another notification that it won't be happening. And then maybe right before we open matters from the public as well.
Does this make sense?
yourself on loop every 20 minutes.
Indeed.
If you're hanging around for 11:20, you don't have to.
Okay, we're talking about a 2-minute limit for public comment because of the great interest, especially in Avon.
Mhm.
Has that been communicated to the public?
The individuals who had signed up or had interest in the Avon earlier, I definitely had communicated the 2 minutes. If we're gonna stick with 2 minutes, we need to add that to our explanation. We may not have the same volume, but I don't know that we're gonna know until we get into the meeting.
This is tricky. I'm looking to my fellow commissioners. 2 minutes or 3 minutes? How are you feeling on this item?
Are we talking for general matters from the public or on the public hearing for the
Public hearing.
ZTA?
We would wanna be consistent.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And then is the general matters for the public like time limited so that at 6 we end it? Is that?
What we've done in the past is we finish the items we can, it's till 6, we start the hearings and then carry anything over until later in the meeting.
I don't have any objection to going back to 3 minutes. I don't know how many people are planning to speak in reference to this PUD.
No.
My guess is that more people are interested in speaking on 2005 JPA, which would be,
Matters before the public.
they'd want to get in before
Yeah.
we approve it.
Mhm.
So if there's more than, I guess,
Mhm.
well, yeah.
Pick a number.
Well,
Interesting.
I
Can
mean,
Or we just stick with 2 if you want.
well, right now, we're 3, and if we go to 2, then the chair will need to declare that at the beginning of the meeting and throughout, so that we communicate that, since 3 is a standard. But as long as we start the meeting with a specific time frame, we're okay.
Okay. My current thinking is to start with 2. Just because we've been talking about it and it seems reasonable to me. Is that fair?
Sure. It wasn't a hill I was prepared to die on.
Me neither.
So,
Okay, Chair, so when you start the meeting, after you do your welcome, you're gonna wanna talk about the 2 minutes, and then talk about the Avon Street, or you can pass it to me if you need me to do some of that, whatever you prefer.
I shall do my best.
I know you can handle it.
Thank you. It's a lot of pieces tonight. Zoning ordinance. I was concerned that this would be an 11:30 PM conversation, and maybe it won't be now, maybe. How are we feeling about a conversation about the zoning ordinance tonight?
Well, we did not prepare anything specific, because we saw that we had quite the agenda. We do have some updates that we can share, and they'll probably be of interest to the public, so it'd be great to do that in the beginning, when we do our report.
Yes.
But if there is other discussion and you all feel like the hour is okay, it's advertised for it, so.
Is this amenable? Okay. We will keep it if we wish to discuss. There has been great interest in the Zero East High application. You may have gotten an email or two about this in the last few days.
Just one.
Sure, it was very exciting to come through all of that. We, in that same report, will give you an update of where that is procedurally, and that's the best we have on that.
My understanding is that the planning commission may formally request public review of the site plan if we wish. I cannot do that by myself. Is there another commissioner who would be willing to initiate that with me?
For what purpose?
Maximum transparency.
Yeah, I will. You would make that request today, or we just do it for some future date?
I would do it by email, naming and CCing the person who is with me. Is that you?
Yeah, I'll help brother out.
Okay, I have Mr. Duranzio with me. Again, I believe it's an administrative review, so I don't know, or not administrative, I'm sorry.
Ministerial.
Thank you, ministerial review. So I'm not expecting any dramatic shifts or surprises, but we can do what we can do. And that is everything. Well, no, that can't be right. PUD ZTA. Questions for staff on this item?
I guess they said they're gonna submit, they're ready to submit next month. I mean, how long does that process take to get, when they submit their PUD application, to actually get it before us?
Well, from a procedure standpoint, whatever you all's recommendation will go forward to council, and that requires 2 readings. And so then a application can come forward. It usually, once it comes forward and to work through the processes, can take a month or 2 before it is scheduled for a hearing and ready for hearing. And then it would be public hearing, and then it would have 2 readings before city council as well.
So if the 2 hearings are not finished before, if we approve our zoning code rewrite before those 2 hearings are done, what happens? Does it just go away?
Yes, that is a question that we have in with our legal counsel on the zoning ordinance timing and transitions of things. And so, yes, that is a wonderful question. With the new zoning ordinance, if the new zoning ordinance is enacted and set at that point in time, the PUD tool is not something that we're considering for the new ordinance, and so there won't be that opportunity.
Is that something that maybe we could discuss, is whether there should be some form of a PUD in the new zoning code, or is that ship already sailed?
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Sorry.
Potentially, but a lot of the things that are being recommended in the zoning ordinance currently are allowing us to move forward with our comprehensive plan goals in a way that we haven't been able to do so with the PUD ordinance.
Okay, Mr. Bob, welcome. There have been so many topics. I hesitate to go through them again.
That's okay. I
Um,
get what I get for being late.
We'll
so.
catch him up as we go.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions about things that may have been on the agenda at this point?
I don't think so. I think you were probably talking about what we're discussing in the end of the zoning discussion we're supposed to have at the end of this.
Yes.
That's all.
Very good. Any further questions on the PUD ZTA?
I have a question. Does it make sense to say a PUD shall contain X acres of land except for parcels zoned a particular zone if PUD is a zone that replaces that old zone? Like,
This sounds like wonderful discussion for that item when we get there.
sure. We'll punt it.
I was thinking the same thing.
Any other sort of clarifying questions about PUD ZTA? Hearing none. I turn your attention to the 501 Cherry preliminary discussion. No consequences, no vote needed. But if you have any questions for staff about this is the time.
I have a question that I'll probably bring up during the meeting, but how it ties into the small area plan for Cherry Avenue.
How about we'll hold on to that?
And that's everything on my long, long list. Anything else that you want to do?
Sure. Is the tree commission thing still happening?
Tree
Yes.
commission is still on my list, yes. You can ask questions about that if you want. Got anything else you want to do for 7 minutes?
Take a nap.
Shall we do a short break until 5:30?
Yes, please.
Very good.
So I always just reset it. What am I doing? I know
I would like to start the Charlottesville Planning Commission meeting for March 14th, 2023. Let's see. I'd like to start with commissioner reports. Actually, I've got a note before we start commissioner reports, which I will remember. That for tonight, because of quite a bit of public interest, we'd like to hold to a 2-minute limit for public comment. And the applicant for 1120 Avon has withdrawn the application. So there is no public hearing currently planned for 1120 Avon. If you do want to speak on 1120 Avon, that will be matters for the public during the 6 p.m. During the segment.
Yes.
Before 6 p.m. And now I would like to start with reports. Mr. Dronzio, can you start us off?
Sure, it's more informational and aspirational than substantive. The Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund Committee has met 3 times with a 4th meeting this Friday. That involved both the portion of the Vibrary Community Fund that's now called HOPS, Housing Operations and Support, and CAP funding. We've made preliminary decisions on the former that we are holding in abeyance until we've reviewed the latter because there's some overlap. CBDG meets tomorrow to get rolling to come before you, I think, in April. And the reconstituted HAC is meeting tomorrow at noon to reconstitute. And so that's all.
Do you recall a Charlottesville Plans Together steering committee meeting?
I was going to bump that to you to give you to report on it, since I'm your backup.
That is terrible news, but I appreciate the heads up.
Right.
Mr. Abab.
I had a meeting with the Tree Commission on the 7th, and I'll be hearing from them later this evening on the state of the urban forest. During that meeting, we nominated 9 trees for protection, and they should come before City Council. And we discussed the importance of having strategies on how to incorporate large existing trees into the new form-based code, how we can have some, methods to protect those, and also allow for room for new trees to be planted that are going to be large canopy trees, and how that meshes into the code. So they're eagerly looking forward to Module 2. Then I have a Citizen Transportation Advisory Committee meeting tomorrow, so I'll report on that the next month.
And Mr. Schwartz?
I missed the BPAC meeting this month, but I understand that the large portion of the discussion involved the dockless mobility and the city's attempts to kind of rein that in a little bit and renew their lease with I forget the company that we're using now.
Veo.
Is it Veo? Thank you. Yes. I know that. I see that every single day. But anyways, for the BAR in February, there is nothing of interest except for we got another project that's going to be appealed to council, but that was 104 Stadium Road. I talked about this a little bit at our work session. It's a parcel that about 10 years ago, council declared and turned into an IPP, and the BAR didn't really feel like it was our place to reverse that without council's kind of saying, yes, you can go ahead and reverse it. So it's in their hands now.
Thank you. Mr. Stolzenberg.
Thanks. I had my first meeting of the Downtown Mall Committee. It's an impressive and very large group of stakeholders. We will be working out all the Downtown Mall's problems over the next year or so. Sorry?
Excellent, you've worked them all out.
Oh, yeah. We'll have them all
Sorted.
all sorted, yeah. It'll be an exciting next several months as it gets ramped up. That was pretty much introductions last time, and a very interesting oral history of the origins of the mall. We also have an MPO Tech meeting coming up next Tuesday.
Mr. Palmer, are you with us on the magic of the internet?
I am, and thanks for having me virtually. Sorry I couldn't be there tonight. Yeah, just a couple things. I mean, obviously we have a number of large projects going on at Ivy Corridor. The McIntyre School is doing an expansion onto Cobb Hall over by Brandon Avenue, that area in JPA, as well as at the athletics area. There's a new athletics building for Olympic sports, but before that, a football operations building. So all those facilities, and then just mention that there was a Board of Visitors meeting earlier this month, last week, and the outcome was that was that concept, site and design guidelines, which is kind of the first step in the design process for capital projects at TVA, were approved for a number of projects at Fontaine to kind of enable the biotech institute that was announced for that site. So that's going to include the institute, central utilities plant, and infrastructure to the roads and stormwater and all that, as well as a parking garage to support the added population at Fontaine. And then there was another concept site design guidelines approved for the Center for Politics, which is actually in the county off of Old Ivy Road. It's a small research center that's small, but it's in the news a lot with Larry Sabato and the prognosticating that he does. So yeah, that's it. And I mentioned the Fontaine one. That's also in the county, but Hosea, if he was here, would probably recount the LUPEC meeting that he attended, where Fontaine is going to be kind of ground zero for a lot of projects coming up with us, the city and their smart scale project, as well as some VDOT county smart scale projects as well. So there's going to be a lot going on there. And RWSA, who is also replacing a lot of pipes in that vicinity. So just, but that's all I have. Thanks.
There's a brick apartment building group on Emmett there I saw was fenced off. Looks like it's been.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. It's called the University Gardens, and that's in the process of being removed. It had come to its functional end. I'll say the housing department or our housing office didn't want to put in the very costly upgrades to keep it going. So we're gonna get rid of those buildings. It's just gonna sit for now. We don't have a future use for it. The parking that's there will remain, but that's all I have on that site for now. But yeah, if you see those buildings coming down, that's what's happening. There was a lot of abatement over the winter of asbestos and other things, and also removal of furniture, and even finding a home for the boilers that were in there. I heard somebody either accepted them as donation or bought them. I'm not sure, but anyway, thanks for noticing that.
Of course, thank you. And I turn to myself. The Charlottesville steering committee, Charlottesville Plans Together steering committee met recently. The discussion was wide-ranging on a number of topics, which did include zoning, including trees on the downtown mall, fire code, a great deal of interest in, I think it's Module 2, which will have a great deal of clarity about a lot of questions, especially it looks like there will be incentives for reducing parking of some kind, which was very exciting. But I'd say a very forward-looking meeting. We're excited to see the new material, and I share in that excitement for sure. At this time, let's see, 5:40.
Want us to give our report?
Yeah, what can you say about NDS?
Sure. I'll go ahead and get started, and I'll turn it right over to James. There has been a lot of public comment the last couple of days concerning the Zero East High Street project. Wanted to let you all know that from a process standpoint, that materials, they're still in the comment review process on the preliminary. And so the third round of comments has been sent, and we notify interested parties when on high-profile projects if people ask. And so once we sent that out, there were a lot of people that chose to express their concerns and comments about the project, and so that spurred that current opportunity that folks took to share those comments with you all. My understanding is that so the code allows for the commission, even though this is a ministerial review, the code does allow for the commission to call up a site plan that wouldn't necessarily come forward, and I understand that we are likely to get paperwork from this body to do that. And so we would schedule that once it is further along in the process, because there are still a lot of comments that remain. Now, there are lots of other things that are going on with this site in general, but that is our little piece of the puzzle. And so, yeah, but we have a very interested public, and we're trying to do the best we can to make sure that they have the knowledge that we have for it.
Thank you.
And then we do have a work session scheduled for March 29th. Remember, that's Wednesday. We moved it from the Tuesday to the Wednesday to accommodate a conflict that council had. I'm going to turn it over to James, who will talk to us a little bit about where we are and what may come forward for that work session.
All right. Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. Good to see you all this evening. So I have the pleasure or whatever to share where we are schedule-wise. Basically, given circumstances really outside of our control, I'm having to exercise what I said early on, that we may need to change our release schedule. And at this point, we're looking at, rather than being able to release Module 2 this week, we're aiming now for a release date of March 29th. And I wish it weren't the case, but circumstances arose at the end of last week, and beginning of this week, they've kind of put us in the position that we need to push out where we are. So we're anticipating for that work session meeting that what we'll use that time for is for staff primarily to do a presentation and introduction to the key components of Module 2 for the Planning Commission and City Council at that meeting. As you guys know, there's some pretty significant components in it, and in particular, everything to do with inclusionary zoning, sensitive communities, and all of that. So I imagine there'll be a presentation on that, and then we'll also present on the other components that are within there: landscaping, parking, signs, and so on. So we'll use that time for that, and you guys will have an opportunity to ask us questions and discuss.
Sorry, did you say you're releasing it on the 29th?
We are releasing
For
it
the-
on the 29th.
Okay. So like 5 minutes before the meeting, or?
We're going to aim for like a late morning, noonish release.
Okay.
We discussed it today.
I'll clear my schedule.
Yes.
You had, or I think the website had said they were trying to get the majority of the feedback by April 1st. Is that date going to be changed?
That
For
was
Module
Module
2?
1.
No, Module 1, yeah. Module 1 it's actually the 30th. Module
Okay.
2 will have its own separate.
Oh, okay.
Deadline,
Okay.
okay.
I don't know where I'm,
No worries. It's all right. A lot of dates floating around.
yeah.
And really, we're doing that just to allow us to keep moving things forward.
makes
I
sense.
mean, if somebody submits a comment on Module 1 on April 1st, we'll probably still accept it.
Other questions on these items?
I think last time you mentioned that you were gonna like compile all the suggested map changes into
Yeah.
a document. Do you know when you're looking at, is that gonna be after all the 3 modules? We'll do the reviews, or?
No, we were planning on having that by the time, what we're aiming for is when we do the open house events for Module 2, that we would have, oh, by the way, here are the things that we're looking at from Module 1, so that there's a clear indication of both that we've received the comments and that we're moving forward with reviewing those and taking next steps on each of them. The resolution of what we do with those comments, with the proposed map changes, with other comments we've received, and they're obviously pretty extensive, that would come in the next consolidated draft when all 3 modules are brought together into one document. But in terms of identifying all those things that we're investigating further about the list of substantive aspects of the Module 1 and the map changes, that's, we'll have in time for that open house. We are looking now at, we had previously been looking at the notion of doing a open house for Module 2 and a separate open house for Module 3. And I think it makes more sense at this point to do an open house for both Module 2 and Module 3. And instead of doing one open house for each, we'll do 2 open houses in different parts of the city, much as we did for Module 1. And I think actually that'll probably work out better in many respects, because I think people will want to be able to talk about Module 2, the contents of Module 2 and 3 in conjunction. So,
Additional questions on all this? Thank you very much.
absolutely.
I see 547. Let's talk 2005 JPA.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry, matters for the public.
not quite.
Too many things. Apologies, I'm doing my best. At this time, I would like to hear matters from the public. As I noted, the application for Avon has been withdrawn, so this is your opportunity to speak on Avon. We are observing a 2-minute limit because of the great public interest tonight. This is also the time to speak on 2005 JPA and the zoning ordinance.
All right, so we are going to handle this procedurally as we have in past meetings. We will first ask if there is anyone in our in-person audience who would like to speak on matters from the public, and then we will move to our virtual audience, and we will alternate until everyone has had an opportunity who chooses to speak during this time frame. So we'll begin with, is there anyone in our in-house audience who would like to speak during matters from the public? All right, sir. And please state your name for the record, please.
Good evening, good afternoon. Chairman and Commissioners, my name is Sam Galland, live at 123 Goodman Street. I wanted to speak tonight on the East High Street proposal to build apartments on the former circus grounds down by the river. The proposal is concerning because it involves a massive amount of fill dirt that would be placed in the 100-year floodplain to elevate the buildings and the surface parking. I think it would be in the neighborhood of about 50,000 cubic yards of fill in addition to the buildings and the impervious parking areas. Fill dirt is the worst way to elevate structures because it increases the risk of flooding to properties around it, and on a large enough scale, it can also change the flow and velocity of the river in flood events. Of course, this proposal has not come to the Planning Commission, but it does include public facilities, new streets, the widening of Caroline Avenue, and the extension and rerouting of sewer and water lines. State code requires that the Planning Commission review proposals for public facilities and make a determination as to whether they are substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan before the facilities are authorized. The exception is if the facilities are considered by the city to already be shown on the comprehensive plan. With respect to this proposal, I think it's clear that those facilities are not shown on the comprehensive plan. You guys spent a lot of time writing the comp plan, a very long time, and I supported it. I think it's a very good comprehensive plan. And I think it would be a shame if you ignored that section of state code and one of the most important roles of the comp plan and of the Planning Commission as well. It sounds like the site plan may be coming to the Planning Commission at some point, and if that happens, perhaps the comprehensive plan determination could happen at the same time. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight, and thanks for all your work.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I'll turn to our virtual audience. If you're interested in speaking from our virtual audience, if you would raise your hand in the Zoom application. If you're on a phone, I don't see anyone on a phone, but if you are on a phone, you would hit *9 and that would raise your hand. Do we have anyone interested in speaking? Remy, I'm not able to see that listing, so.
We have no raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, we'll go back to our in-person audience. Is there anyone in person who would like to speak during matters from the public? All right, I see no hands here. Remy, can you check one more time on our virtual audience, please?
At this moment, no raised hands.
All right, Chair, it looks like we don't have any other speakers.
Okay, thank you all. I'd like to close the public comment at this time. And I would like to discuss 2005 JPA.
Let's do the consent agenda.
Ooh, thank you very much. Let us consider a consent agenda. Mr. Duranzi, I believe you mentioned something about this?
Yes, sir. I would move that we accept the consent agenda with the amended consent agenda, which removes item 2, 2005 JPA, pursuant to the request of the applicant.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And I'm abstaining again just because of the minutes.
Thank you very much. I believe we are okay to cover 2005 JPA this time.
Yes.
Mr. Warner, please.
Good evening to y'all. So I'll start with just a summary of the request and then get into why we're having this tonight. Again, this is the development of a 1.7 acre, 3 parcels project. The existing structure will be raised to construct a multi-story brick and stucco apartment building with a footprint of approximately 312 feet by 155 feet. The building will feature 2 5-story wings separated by a courtyard and atop a 2-story brick foundation or podium, which provides a street-level primary entrance and encloses an internal parking garage accessed off of Washington Avenue. And you all reviewed this a month ago on February 14th, 2023. The result was an approval of the COA, a 7-0 vote that approved the motion for approval with conditions. However, there was an error regarding the public notice posted at the site, and which I'll explain, and so that's why we're here this evening. So, like I said, I don't typically put up the signs, and I thought the EC signs had a week, and they need to go up in 10 days. So I put this one up 8 days ahead, and but that was pointed out by some of the neighbors, and so in the discussion, it was decided to simply re-advertise it and get that correct. So we did have a new sign posted on the site, actually on February 28th, and I put up 2 additional signs, one on Observatory Ave and one on Washington Ave on March 1st, and the new notice letters were also sent out. So, but with all of that, and just so you all are aware, received several letters of appeal to the February 14th decision. Those are appeals to City Council. And just wanted to kind of try to address at least sort of, I tried to go through and kind of say what were the key comments and maybe just to offer some context for those. So, and for example, well, one of the questions is, what are the actual height, the density? Density doesn't fall under your purview. That was established by the special use permit, and also the maximum height of 75 feet was established by council's approval of special use permit. The applicant's here tonight, so certainly can answer any dimension questions you have. There were a lot of comments about massing and scale. For example, it's not compatible with existing structures. It's extremely large, nothing like the surrounding residences, overwhelming, inappropriate, et cetera. And all I can say is that you all reviewed the COA request on February 14th, and you applied the EC standards of review, and the COA was approved. There were comments about the plan not representing modifications that were required by the ERB. I don't know what that means. Nothing's changed since you all reviewed it on February 14th. A lot of comments about the height, and 5 stories out of character with the neighborhood. It dwarfs any other buildings. It's tall and gargantuan. It doesn't fit within the neighborhood, et cetera. And references to the guidelines and projects of a certain height relative to neighboring properties with smaller, lower buildings. And again, I can only say that you all reviewed the project COA on February 14th, and you applied the standards of review and approved the COA. There are quite a few general concerns expressed. Obviously, concerns for traffic congestion, noise, light pollution. Several comments about the number of people in the unit, the service personnel. There will be result in noise, human activity that needs to be managed. And again, I understand concerns ahead of a development project, but you all do not have, or the ERB does not have purview over traffic control. And I don't know, by the way, do they have to gavel into the ERB?
Yes.
So I don't forget. And then you don't have purview over traffic control. You don't have purview over uses that are allowed by zoning, and certainly don't have purview over policing the city. So, and I don't mean those to sound disrespectful. It's just simply what's under your purview. And again, you all reviewed the thing on February 14th and approved it. Comments about it doesn't fit with existing zoning. The project is presented tonight and on February is permitted under current zoning with the approved special use permit. Some questions about the materials. We had talked about the drive-it. I know there was comment about the color, but we did have a condition in the approvals. The stucco will be a durable synthetic material, which is mechanically fastened over appropriate drainage mats, et cetera, et cetera. So that was addressed in the condition. A lot of comments about traffic, parking, and the garage. Again, understandable about traffic concerns ahead of a project, but you all do not have purview over traffic management. You don't have purview over parking violations or accessibility of emergency vehicles, or even some recommendations of restricting parking on Observatory and Washington Avenue. That does not fall under your purview. Also, there's a condition of the special use permit that the owner develop a master parking plan. There was concern expressed about vehicles entering and exiting the garage, be noisy, and would have headlights beaming on to adjacent properties. Obviously, but other than to prohibit on-site parking, I don't know how you prevent cars entering and exiting a site from shining on adjacent buildings, wherever that entrance is. There was a recommendation to require 2 garage entrances, possibly consider an alternative onto JPA. Again, you all approved it following the standards, and also the guidelines for parking. They recommend reducing the visibility of garages by not having them on the primary facade, and to locate them where this is located. So in fact, putting the entrance on JPA would be in conflict with the guidelines. There was several questions about screening and mechanical equipment. Again, you all included 2 conditions relative to the screening of mechanical utility service boxes and any ground level mechanical equipment. Concerns about site lighting, for example, suggestion that properly situated lighting will help. Recommend low strength outdoor lighting. Exterior lights need to be more specific. Lighting was addressed as a specific condition in the COA, the usual stuff about the color, temperature, dimmability, et cetera. Comment about the landscaping, that the project would destroy mature trees, and trees will take 20 years to grow. There is a condition in the COA about the number, size, type of trees that is be consistent with the plans. And approximately 25 existing trees will be removed. 18 of them range between 4 and 15 inches. 7 would be considered mature trees. ranging between 20 and 40 inches. New trees will be approximately 70, 17 large canopy, 10 medium canopy, 25 small flowering, and 18 evergreen. Several comments about the trash and recycling. The dumpsters will be loud. Debris and odor, traffic, trash truck traffic, trash pickup, timing, et cetera. The means it is done is not under your purview. A condition of the approved COA addressed dumpsters and trash and recycling bins be located within the garage, so you address that. Several comments about the rear pathway. Needs to be efficient for all users, concerns about ADA accessibility, suggestion that steps be eliminated and the bike runnels be eliminated. This is behind the building, so you almost in some ways wouldn't fall under your review, but you did review it and it was approved with the COA. Several concerns about construction activity, noise, traffic, parking, how cranes and might make the streets impassable. Those are not issues that are under your purview. And then finally, several questions about affordable housing. Will this project provide affordable housing? That this is a place that will luxury units that cater to the wealthy. How the space is used, what the rents are, is not under your purview, but I'll say I'm not aware of any rents or anything being advertised or discussed. So those are the comments that I've received, trying to summarize them as best I can. If you have any questions for me, I know the applicant's here again tonight, but again, we're here because I messed up, so it was my mistake.
Questions for staff?
Point of order.
Please.
Mr. Chair, do we not have to actually convene as the ERB to?
This is an excellent point. I now declare us to be the ECRB, or ERB, as some say.
So you're telling me you didn't get a single comment on the green panels?
I did, well, there was, that it hadn't been resolved, and I think, that was one of the comments, was that color selection resolved?
That it was resolved, or was?
Was asking if it had been.
Ah.
So, and I assume that'll come up tonight, but that.
Any additional questions for staff? At this time, I would entertain a motion.
So can I float a question for?
Please.
Maybe three of you. I don't want to rehash this whole thing, but I am still concerned about the green panels. And if they were just a splash of color and artistic flair, I would begrudge you your bad taste. But I note that the signage, the conceptual signage that isn't approved next to the door is the same the same color of green. And so it seems to me that they probably fall under guidelines, design guidelines, chapter 4, section F, color. Number 6, do not use strong color that has the effect of turning the entire building into a sign. And it seems to me that if this color of green is a theme for the building, these panels could be considered in violation of that section, and maybe we should add a condition that they be turned into a more muted color. So does anyone agree with me?
Conversation on this subject?
Strongly disagree.
I'd agree. I think the only, within our purview, the only thing that I still feel iffy about was the green panel. So I would.
No.
No, you don't agree? Or no?
Correct.
comments?
No, I do not agree.
I also do not agree.
All right, keeping the green.
Here's this is the motion language included as part of the materials.
Can I just reference this then?
You may, there's some
You may.
parentheticals in there, but that's, just to kind of, like, for example, clarifying the lighting, but yeah, you can read that verbatim. Would you like me to read it?
I could
Whatever.
read it.
I can read it.
Oh, boy.
But I can't reference it, you're saying? Can't
No,
just
no,
say
you can.
in the materials.
I think it would be procedurally helpful if
Read it
it's
verbatim.
read into the record.
Yep. verbatim.
All right, I'll do my best to do it as quickly as I can. Having considered the standards set forth within the city's entrance corridor design guidelines, I move to find the proposed design for 2005 Jefferson Park Avenue is consistent with the guidelines and compatible with the goals of this entrance corridor, and that the ERB approves the certificate of appropriateness application submitted with the following conditions of approval. Glass will be clear at the locations noted in the staff report. New railings, if required, will match the metal rail at the podium terrace as presented in the submittal dated 12/20/2022. All exterior lighting and interior lighting visible from the garage will have lamping that is dimmable, has a color temperature not exceeding 3,000 Kelvin, has a color rendering index not less than 80, preferably not less than 90. Additionally, the owner will address any reasonable public complaints about light glare by either dimming the lamp or replacing the lamp/fixtures. Note, this condition addresses 2 light sources. Exterior lighting refers to all site and exterior lighting fixtures. Interior lighting visible from the garage refers to all lighting fixtures inside the garage. Dumpsters and trash and or recycling bins to be located within the garage and pulled to the curb only on collection days. If used for mechanical units, utility/service boxes, storage, trash containers, the mech equip area noted on sheet 44 at the west elevation will be appropriately screened. That screening will be subject to approval by design staff and must be memorialized as an amendment to the site plan. Any ground level mechanical equipment and or utility boxes will be appropriately screened. That screening will be subject to approval by design staff and must be memorialized as an amendment to the site plan. Meters and panel boxes for utility, communications, and cable connections will be located preferably within the garage. If not, then in non-prominent locations on the side elevations only and appropriately screened. That screening will be subject to approval by design staff and must be memorialized as an amendment to the site plan. Stucco used in the site will be a durable synthetic material which is mechanically fastened over appropriate drainage match with a code-compliant water-resistant barrier. Bicycle runnels should be provided as part of the multi-use path at the rear of the site. There will be no uplighting of landscaping on the site. The number, size, type, and character of all plantings, trees, shrubs, etc., and the biofilter shall be installed and maintained in substantial accordance with the drawings. Reference sheets 44 through 48 of the submittal dated 12/20/2022. Screening of vehicular lighting at the south wall of the parking garage, particularly at headlight level. Glare and brightness visible outside the garage. How was that?
I'll second.
Second.
Any conversation on this item? Ms. Creasy, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Schwartz?
Yes.
Mr. Durancio?
Aye.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Habab?
Aye.
And Mr. Sola Yates?
Aye.
Rory, you could get a job as a, read the disclaimers at the end
Yeah.
of commercials.
TV commercial. If I just, one final comment is, I know the folks that, the neighboring property owners, they again have the right to appeal. That would be, this is now the approved COA, and they have the right to appeal that. I have a lot going on. I can't promise when an appeal would get to council, but work that out with my bosses. But yes, so just to the folks out there, if they wish to appeal, then they can respond a second time that what was done prior does not constitute current appeal.
Duly noted, thank you.
Mr. Chair. A motion to close the ERB and go back to being the planning commission.
I declare ourselves to no longer be the ERB, and I wish to resume being the planning commission. Council, welcome.
Yes, we have counselors here, so we can begin.
Apologies for the delay, we had to discuss aesthetics. Thank you for your patience.
Reminding about Avon.
Yes. The 1120 Avon application has withdrawn. That public hearing will not take place. Thank you for it. Okay. Mr. Mayor, is council in order?
We are indeed.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would like to consider a public hearing on a planned unit development zoning text amendment. Who is giving this report?
Mr. O'Connell will be providing that for us this evening.
Please.
Good afternoon. Dan O'Connell, planner with NDS, and tonight I will be presenting to you a zoning text amendment that was initiated by City Council on January 3rd, 2023, to modify the required development size for planned unit development districts for properties currently zoned urban corridor mixed-use district. So section 34-492 of our current code requires PUD sites to contain 2 or more acres of land. The proposed amendment would remove this acreage requirement for parcels that are currently zoned urban corridor mixed-use district. and that would make the lots or parcels less than 2 acres within that district eligible for rezoning into planned unit developments. This amendment is in response to a request from Valerie Long of Williams Mullen, representing RMD Properties LLC. RMD Properties is the current owner of 2117 Ivy Road and wishes to redevelop this property with a 9-story mixed-use apartment building. The property in question is slightly over 1 acre in size and is currently zoned urban corridor. The property owner and the representative are requesting the zoning text amendment in part to enable 2117 Ivy Road to be developed as a PUD. So some background, planned unit development districts were first implemented in the city's 1976 zoning ordinance with a 3-acre minimum size requirement. This minimum acreage requirement was removed from December of 2001 to July of 2006, and that allowed PUDs to be approved with no minimum parcel size. The current 2-acre minimum was added to the zoning ordinance via zoning text amendment in July of 2006. Now, according to city GIS data, there are currently 83 parcels in the city-zoned urban corridor. Of those, 16 are owned by the University of Virginia and would not be subject to city zoning for development standards. So excluding those properties, there is a total of 58 parcels currently zoned urban corridor that are less than 2 acres of size, and I've included maps of that in your packet for this evening. So these properties, and that would include 2117 Ivy Road, would become eligible for rezoning planned unit development with the passage of the zoning text. But of course, additional properties could become available for PUD rezoning should their boundaries change in the immediate future. So this change to planned unit development districts may allow new developments within the urban corridor zoning district to better align with the vision contained within the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. PUD rezonings could allow for higher residential densities, higher building heights, and smaller setbacks than what is currently allowed by right in the urban corridor district. PUDs have been used numerous times in the past to allow infill development and permit a mix of housing options. And the PUD process does involve community meetings and a public hearing process before the Planning Commission and City Council, allowing for opportunities for public comment and discussion. However, the City of Charlottesville is also currently undertaking a full rewrite of the zoning ordinance. Any changes made to the current zoning ordinance would be effectively overridden by the new ordinance when it is adopted. And so this zoning text amendment may therefore be extremely limited in its usefulness to developers, as it may only be in effect for several months. So in conclusion, the proposed change to planned unit development districts could be used to meet some of the height and intensity goals of the comp plan for parcels currently zoned urban corridor. However, in practice, staff feels the change is somewhat redundant given that the entire zoning ordinance is being rewritten to achieve these goals. Although currently in a draft form, the proposed new zoning ordinance and map shows most properties currently zoned urban corridor will be upzoned to permit 5 to 8-story mixed-use development by right without the need for a PUD rezoning or other special permits. The zoning text amendment would likely only benefit one parcel, specifically 2117 Ivy Road, whose owners have stated their intention to submit a PUD rezoning application immediately following the approval of this change. But with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Dronzio, questions for staff?
So, yeah, likely to only, and this may be an applicant question, but if it's likely to only benefit this one parcel, I mean, bill of attainder issue aside, is the timeline such that this, I mean, I guess the applicant thinks this provides a benefit to them in some
So
way.
just for clarification, this is, we do not have an applicant.
Right.
We had a request
Request. Well, okay, the requestor.
from an individual, and they presented that to council, so council initiated that,
Right.
and
Here we
it's
are.
coming forward. So it's a little nuance in
Nuanced,
the, in the
right.
titling.
I won't use the term applicant, but the interested parties who intend to apply for this PUD, what's the impact on the timeline here? Am I missing something? For either their behavior or the zoning rewrite and its timing?
I can't speak to the
I mean,
timeline of the
We don't have the timeline.
person who requested this request, but the line in there was basically because the text of that request mentioned that the owner of this property in specific would want to submit a PUD as soon as the change is made. But there are 50-some other properties that this would conceivably benefit, that those owners could conceivably submit for PUDs after this change is made.
Right, I guess to follow up on that, but the procedure for moving a PUD forward in those cases, would we not, before we got too far down this road, have a new zoning ordinance in its entirety? I mean, that's causing you to call for a conclusion based on what all your bosses can get accomplished by then, but am I getting that right, that there isn't really much of a window for a bunch of people to do this?
That would be correct,
Okay.
yes. It depends on when the new zoning takes effect and how far along in that process a PUD would need to be grandfathered in.
Right, and
Yeah.
we haven't really wrestled with that yet, okay.
Mr. Duranzio, do you wish to ask the requester?
Yeah, it's almost out of curiosity at this point.
Is there any complaint on this from the commission or from council?
Complain about what, sorry?
May I
Hearing
ask-
from the requester.
Oh, no.
Ms. Long, would you please approach?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Valerie Long. As noted, we made the request on behalf of a client of ours who's the developer working with the property owner. All fair questions, and I'm happy to elaborate now or wait more to answer more during the public hearing, but it's really a matter of timing. First, let me say outright, this is not at all an effort to do an end run or beat the new ordinance. Our client is very excited about the new ordinance. And they are designing the project to comply with the new ordinance draft as much as we have now. Our hope is that we'll be able to pivot, but due to contractual timing issues with the property owner, we had to
You
get
have to move.
started.
Okay.
And while we're cautiously optimistic that things are moving forward on schedule with the new ordinance, in the unlikely event that it is delayed, we would have lost that time. So we needed to be able to get started. We recognize it's an awkward request. We debated about whether to do it for this very reason, but we think it's a wonderful opportunity to get a project started. We think it's an opportunity for real early success story with the ordinance and the new comprehensive plan. So the idea would be submit the PUD application as noted as soon as possible after this is adopted, if it is adopted. And then if a month or two later or a couple months later, the ordinance is adopted, hopefully it's really a technicality of we could withdraw the rezoning application and it would be a site plan application under the new ordinance, assuming that all those regulations are in place. But that's the reasoning behind the admittedly awkward timing of the request.
Hard contractual stop dates and such. Okay, thanks.
Certainly.
While we have you, any other questions for the requester?
I
Please.
have one question. I know in the letter, it says, it makes like a broad commitment to trying to meet affordability goals. My one big concern would just be is if the affordability doesn't match what will be in our draft inclusionary zoning program. So do you have any specifics at this point about what that affordability commitment is in specifics?
Not specifics, but they are planning to comply with, they're designing the project to the new ordinance, and that includes the new affordable housing inclusionary zoning requirements. So recognizing those could potentially change. They're very aware of what they are and are planning to comply with those. They're designing it for that way. For some reason, again, there's a delay. They would comply with the ordinance requirements that are in place now. But they certainly recognize the importance of affordable housing, and council and commission's interest in that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the requester? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Connell, please return. Mr. Duranzio, do you have any more questions?
That was enough.
Thank you. Mr. Abab.
No.
Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Stolzenberg.
First, I'd note for Mr. Duranzio that this commission rejected a zoning amendment I proposed in April 2019 on the basis that we were about to have a new zoning ordinance. My question for you is, does it make sense to have this clause that a PUD shall contain 2 or more acres of land except for parcels zoned urban corridor, when, you know, PUD by nature of being its own zoning district would be zoned PUD and no longer urban corridor?
Right, but the parcels to be considered for a PUD rezoning would have to be zoned something else. So it would apply to only those parcels zoned urban corridor, that's exception would be made, and that would be understood since they would be zoned urban corridor up until the point that the PUD is approved by city council.
Okay. And then I guess the question is, does it, or what's the advantage of doing it like that narrowly tailored? Is it just that, like, it would take more time for you guys to do the analysis of every parcel in the city, and so it would drag this all out, or just that you wanted it to be narrowly tailored so it didn't become like a whole big thing?
I think the issue of redundancy, as I put in my report, was simply the fact that we have this new process coming where things like this will be done by right, and if we are following a strict timetable, then this change may only be applicable for 6 months, if that. The PUD process, though, is a known entity. We know how it works, and so conceivably you could get the same results. You could fulfill the same objectives with the PUD or with the new zoning ordinance.
So, would we? Is it that we just like don't want a flood of PUDs? Like, I guess I'm thinking it makes sense to just get rid of this 2-acre requirement, like blanket, and go back to how it was in 2004 or whatever. Is there any like particular reason not to? Or was it just that the request was narrower in scope, and so we kept it narrow in scope?
Well, if by some horrifying event we don't get new zoning ordinances in the immediate future, then I went back and did some research on why this 3-acre minimum was removed, and apparently it led to a number of PUDs which were very small and basically did not meet the requirements of the ordinance, which is why the limit was put back. So I don't think there will be more PUDs in the near future, aside from one on Ivy Road, but it is a remote possibility that could happen, in which case it is a remote possibility that it may be a problem.
There would need to be extensive research done, which would probably be beyond what we could do in-house with all of our other things to really focus in on that. I was here for the stuff back in the early 2000s when we didn't have, for those few years, did not have a limit. I'm sorry. And it was very challenging. So the infill SUP was a tool that was created to try and address that. Sorry. That tool wasn't very effective either. The PUD in the code has a lot of different requirements, and you've got to have some space for those requirements. So once you get under 2 acres, it's really difficult to achieve what the PUD ordinance is noting.
Mr. Stolzenberg, any more questions?
That's all I got. Thanks.
Mr. Palmer, are you with us?
Yeah, I am. I don't have any questions specific to this right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. O'Connell?
Yes.
I assume that, I don't know if you've seen the draft application. Is it possible for this parcel to meet those requirements of the PUD?
For a PUD currently?
Yes.
I believe so, yes. We had a pre-application meeting with the applicant and city staff a while ago, and they showcased some conceptuals that weren't submitted to us, but they were shown, and apparently, and according to those materials, it did look like they would be able to meet the open space buffer, all those requirements in the current PUD ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Payne?
Just a quick confirmation of process. So if this is approved, the next steps would be the applicant would submit a PUD, which go to Planning Commission and then City Council for a vote?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Biggs?
No questions. Thank you.
Mayor Snook?
What would be, assuming you pass it, we pass it, and let's say come May 1, by amazing chance, this has all been done, how much, given the way that they've already gotten started on things, what's reasonable to think in terms of when the PUD application would come back before either this body or council? We're talking 3 months, 6 months, 9 months?
If a PUD was submitted, it could take 1 to 2 months for staff to review. If there are any comments that we would need to work out, there may be a back and forth between us and the applicant for them to change their proposal. But after that, we would move it to the Planning Commission. So it could take 2 months, 3 months.
After the staff is done?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, in all likelihood, we're not gonna see anything for, 6 months after it's adopted by council?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And I should say, when this came before council, I don't mean to speak for others, but just speaking for myself, I was interested in referring it to you all just because I wanted to see what you all would say. Not because we have conceived in advance that we think this is something we want to have happen, but rather having respect for the intellectual power of the folks on this body to find out what you all have to say. I'll be curious to know if you have any substantive concerns or thoughts one way or the other. I guess on the one hand, I am not a fan of unnecessarily getting bogged down in SUPs. And it seems like that may be kind of what's going on here. But if Ms. Long says, for various reasons that I guess need not be discussed in public, but I think we all kind of get, it's got to move forward. We still would have the ability, I suppose, if we don't like the idea, to say, no, we're not going to give you this particular SUP, in which case we've had essentially the one bite of the only apple that we're likely to see under this proposed revision. So although it kind of does a little violence to my sense of how the ordinance ought to be administered, I don't think that it's going to be substantively obnoxious. So that's just sort of my thought on it at this point.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to hear from the public. Thank you very much, Mr. O'Connell.
All right, we will address this procedurally as we have in the past. We'll first ask our in-person audience for interested speakers, and speakers will have the opportunity to have 2 minutes to address the commission and council. And then we'll go to our virtual audience, and then we will alternate as long as we have speakers who are interested in this matter. So we'll first start with our in-person audience. Do we have anyone who'd like to speak? Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Creasy. I just wanted to be brief. Obviously, offer to answer any further questions you may have, and then just reiterate, we appreciate you all taking the time to consider this, and we hope that it is something that will enable the project to move forward, give the developer some comfort in continuing to invest money in the design process and the application, engineering, surveying, architecture work, all underway. And have a little bit of comfort knowing that they can continue to do that process, knowing that they'll have, if there is a delay in the zoning ordinance, that they will have a path forward. So again, we're happy to answer any further questions. Thank you.
All right, I will turn to our virtual audience.
We have Peter Gray.
Okay. Mr. Gray, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You can go ahead and address the group.
Thanks very much. I just would like to ask all the decision makers in the room to please recognize that this proposed change, for what it is, it's an run on your legislative power to attempt to slip something through in before this new zoning is in place, despite the statements made earlier. There are many specific aspects to the new zoning that would apply to the development that are not contemplated in the current zoning. Please do not permit RMD properties to sneak something by you in order to give these developers a special and unusual benefit that is inappropriate for the property in question. Please make them conform fully with the new ordinance, not merely assert that they are trying to comply with what they think it might be. We know that these claims made on behalf of the developer are in no way binding and therefore are entirely worthless. Thank you for your time.
And thank you.
All right, we'll return to our in-person audience. Do we have any speakers from our in-person audience? All right, we'll turn to our virtual audience.
No more hands raised at this time.
Okay, if there's anyone in our virtual audience who's interested in speaking to the zoning text amendment for the PUD and the urban corridor, please raise your hand virtually. If you are on a telephone, you would hit *9 and that would raise the hand. All right, we'll try one more time in our in-person audience. Okay, and our virtual audience.
There are no more hands raised at this time.
All right, thank you. Chair, looks.
All right, at this time, I'd like to close the public hearing. Thank you very much. And I turn to discussion. Mr. Durancio, can you start us off? What are you thinking?
Based on the comments here, I guess I'm viewing this as a procedural matter to keep the process going forward. I do not see the harm elsewhere in approving this amendment, in the sense of using harm as getting a flood of applications that are going to bog us down prior to the, despite the cautionary tale of the 2019 meeting, but also taking due note of it. My thinking is that this does no harm elsewhere. We would still be riding herd on the PUD as it moved forward anyway. So I'm inclined to support the change.
Mr. Habab.
I am kind of of two minds. I agree that if we do approve it, it's low risk because we do end up reviewing the PUD anyways, and we can make our comments then on what we see for the design in the program. But it is setting up a very confusing process that seemingly just privileges one party that is ready to bounce on this, and that's my concern.
If I can come back to that, it may in fact privilege the party, but we, the city, have also sort of put them in a box, in a sense, that their view of the highest and best use of developing this one way or the other is sort of hostage to our timetable, in a sense. On the one hand, on the other hand, they've declared in public that they intend to, that they're trying to conform to, as they understand it, the new zoning ordinance too. So does it privilege them? Sure. Does it penalize them by saying no? Maybe. And I think that that's why, hearings and nuances are here. And if we were 3 years out, my decision would probably be different. 4 years out.
Mr. Bob, did you complete your thought?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartz.
Yeah, I can't see the harm in approving this. I mean, we will get to see the the PUD application, so just because we're approving the text amendment doesn't mean that we're approving a project. And who knows what the future could hold? I mean, lawsuits happen, so who knows when we're going to get our zoning code rewritten. So yeah, if somebody thinks that they can do, if they think they can do a better job than our zoning code in making a a project that fits our comprehensive plan, I think we should see what they have to offer.
Mr. Stolzenberg.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Habab that it would be better to have a rule that was more broad and applied to more of the city. And I mean, I don't love the 2-acre requirement in general. I don't want to relitigate a PUD request from when I was 14, but when I look at what we got on Franklin Street on a 0.9 acre PUD, and look at what was proposed in that PUD, it seems to me that what we got was substantively worse for the city, for affordability, and it seems to me that smaller PUDs can be viable and beneficial. That said, I don't want to increase the scope of this so much that it drags out and puts a bunch of extra work on staff. So I'm reluctantly willing to not try to make this broader than the urban corridor. I'd also note that this, the urban corridor itself, is sort of a special case where, this is the last parcel on Ivy Road that is not owned by UVA and therefore not subject to our zoning. Even among the urban parcels where Denton filtered out the UVA ones, most of the remaining, or at least all the ones on Ivy and many of the others, are owned by the UVA Foundation and are likely to be transferred to UVA for development at some later point. So we might end up getting a building that is as large as contemplated here or under the new zoning, and without getting a dime of tax revenue for it that we could be using to fund our schools and other services. To me, that is a worthy goal. Not that I have anything against UVA. Never mind, Bill's not here.
Sit there.
He's not in the window. But I think there's benefit to having privately owned student housing that pays taxes. So I think it makes sense to move this forward.
Thank you. Mr. Palmer, you've been summoned.
Yeah, well, as UVA representative, I got to be, I'm not really gonna. We don't have an official, stance on this project per se. So I'll just say I think you guys are thinking about this in the right way and pros and cons, and I haven't heard anything or have anything thoughts that are different than what I've heard. I think you're describing the situation well, and trust that you'll do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Speaking for myself, I once promised Planning Commissioner John Santosky that I would kill the PUD system. But I haven't done it yet, but John, I'm trying so hard.
We're close.
We're so close. Oh God, we're close. I hate PUDs so much. It breaks my heart to consider another one. That said, I see some merit in this one. It makes some sense to me. Mr. Payne.
Just likewise, I mean, I'm uncomfortable with the process, but I also understand where we're at, and I guess I'm given some comfort that because both bodies will need to approve the PUD, we'll have 2 points to say you aren't matching the requirements of the draft or possibly finished zoning rewrite, in my mind, particularly the affordable housing requirements. So that gives me a little comfort, and definitely agree with Commissioner Stolzenberg in terms of UVA buying up this whole corridor and that potentially being lost revenue. And I believe Albemarle approved a fairly large development in this corridor as well just a week or two ago. So, yeah.
Mr. Pinkston.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't understand the process as well as I should. So from this point, I mean, typically with the process is that the PUD would come back before y'all and us?
So from a process standpoint,
Uh-huh.
if this code change, so the planning commission will provide a recommendation on the code change.
Right.
And then that code change recommendation will come forward to council for 2 readings.
Right.
If council decides to approve that code change, then the applicant would have the opportunity to submit a PUD because they would be allowed to under the code. It would be reviewed, it would come to the planning commission for joint hearing.
Okay.
And then return with the recommendation that comes from the commission, and then it would go to council for those 2 readings.
Got it. Thank you. That's very helpful. That's all I need. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Snook.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Of course. At this time, I would like to hear further discussion or a possible motion.
Mr. Chair, I would like to offer a motion.
Please.
I move to recommend approval of the zoning text amendment as proposed to Section 34-492, Planned Unit Development Districts - configuration of the zoning ordinance based on a finding that the proposed zoning text amendments will serve the public necessity, convenience, general welfare, or good zoning practice.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion on this item?
Just say it's always good to have motivation to keep on schedule, so this PUD doesn't come to fruition.
Anything additional? Ms. Creasy, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Schwartz?
Yes.
Mr. Duranzio?
Aye.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Habab?
Aye.
And Mr. Sola Yates?
Aye. Sorry, John. I believe this public hearing is closed. Council, you are most welcome to stay. If you want to do anything else with your lives, though, that would be perfectly acceptable. How are we feeling? Do we want a short break, or are we ready for 5:01, Sherry?
I could take 5.
I'm hearing 5. Any issue with 5? Let's do 5. Thank you very much.
What's next on the agenda?
501.
real mixed bag.
Oh, well.
We get to cover the difference then.
Welcome back, all. Mr. Offley, can you tell us about Cherry Avenue, please?
Yes, Planning Commission, Matt Alfley, City Planner, Neighborhood Development Services. So tonight, you're just having a preliminary discussion about a proposed rezoning in SUP at 501 Cherry, the old location for the IGA that's not in use, and the surrounding 4 properties, which also includes gravel parking kind of in the back. The rezoning is being proposed from Cherry Avenue and R1S. That's the weird part of this, the kind of gravel area, which a lot of people assume is part of that parking, is actually zoned R1S. But a proposed rezoning from Cherry Avenue R1S to B3 with an SUP. This proposal would be to reuse the existing building to allow residential developments, adjust the parking standards, adjust the setbacks. Again, this is preliminary, so this is the applicant's going to give a brief presentation, but this is an opportunity to provide some feedback. They've yet to have their community meetings, so this is not going to move forward to a public hearing until they have the community meeting, so you probably won't see this again for several months. But it gives you a chance to provide feedback to the applicant as they're preparing their application. They want to make any modifications or changes. Again, that'll be the same thing when they do their community meeting. With that, I'll turn it over to the applicant. Have Kelsey with Shemp Engineering and then Chris with Woodard Properties are here. And they'll give a brief presentation on what they're proposing.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, commissioners, council. So before Kelsey comes up and talks about some of the site specifics, I just wanted to give a brief background about the project since we closed on it last August. Before closing on the project, or the property, we did contemplate a by right development using the 4 Cherry Ave zoned parcels. And that by right development would have been 47 market rate apartments, market rate commercial. Even though that worked financially, we wanted the project to be something that was more community focused and more alignment with the community and neighborhood goals. So we started thinking about how to add apartments to the site, economically priced apartments. And at the same time, we started talking with a couple of local nonprofits, one of which benefits underserved youth, and the other nonprofit benefits seniors, underserved seniors. And what came out of that was us essentially reserving or committing a large portion of the commercial square footage on the property to condo space that these nonprofits could purchase at below market rates. And the remaining commercial space we reserved for a grocery store use or neighborhood market. As most of you know, the Cherry Ave Small Area Plan, top priority of it is bringing affordable, healthy food to Fightville. So in addition to reserving that space, the last 8 months, we've spent a lot of time and worked hard having discussions, meeting with local organizations, companies, the city, about how we could make this project a part of the solution, the food access solution of Fightville. So we don't have anybody signed up yet for the grocery store neighborhood market, but we're hopeful as the project progresses and if we're successful with the SUP and rezoning, that it will become a reality. So in addition to that, on the affordable housing front, we have proffered in excess of what the current ordinance requires. I know affordable housing is a key issue, especially in Fikeville. So we are looking, working with a nonprofit housing provider to try and increase the amount of affordable housing in the project. And I did want to let everyone know too that we have been in discussions and communication with the leadership of the Fikeville Neighborhood Association about the affordable housing efforts, and collaborating with them on the grocery use, and keeping them on the loop with our progress on the nonprofits. In summary, there's got three main reasons we're here. One is to increase the residential density on the site. Two is to increase the minimum square footage of retail space, which would be for one of the nonprofits. And then three, allow a grocery store use, which is not currently allowed in the Cherry Ave zoning. And I guess one other note, it's a question I kind of want to get ahead of. A lot of people have asked us why we're pushing ahead with this rezoning and SUP ahead of the zoning rewrite that's currently underway. The main reason is one of the nonprofits is under a lease renewal deadline. Their lease isn't going to renew the property they're at, and they need to find a new home. Two, it's really expensive to hold undeveloped land in Charlottesville, so we'd like to get this going. And lastly, we think this is a great project. It's bringing together local companies to solve, for community benefit and to solve issues in the community. So, why wait for a project like that? With that said, I think Kelsey's gonna a couple of specifics on the site.
Thanks, Chris, and apologies for talking during the beginning of your presentation. We had a few slides that we prepared, just some specifics of our application that I wanted to go over with you. Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Kelsey Schlein. I'm a planner with Shimp Engineering. We've been assisting Woodard Properties with their proposal here. As Matt stated, well, I guess just to draw you to the site context here. So you can see the two white buildings is the massing diagram of the proposed buildings, kind of in the center bottom right of your screen. So we're looking at the property. It's right across from Tonsler Park and framed by 5th Street and 6th Street and Cherry along the front of the site. Next slide, please. Just again, a site context, so we can go to the next slide as well. And so this is the existing conditions. So when Matt was referencing in his brief presentation, so the front 4 parcels are currently zoned Cherry Avenue. The one parcel in the rear that's kind of jutting out, that is zoned R1S, but historically has always kind of operated as a single unit with the rest of these parcels. If you look at the historic aerial imagery kind of dating back to the 1950s, you can see items stored there, cars parked there over a period of time. So although it's zoned R1S, it has always functioned as accessory to this commercial use that's on the property. Next slide, please. So here you can see our design proposal. So the proposal is to maintain the former IGA building and then add a second story to that, and then add an additional building footprint that's a maximum of 5 stories with limitations and quite strict limitations to the setback of that 5th story, 80 feet from the rear, just to provide some relief going towards the lower density residential properties further up 6th Street, and front setback on that 5th story as well. There's structured parking with a maximum of 2 levels proposed with this, and then on the proposed new building, it's 2 stories of structured parking, and then there will be 2 to 3 stories of building above that as well. And just kind of circling back to what Chris said, the main one of kind of a big driver for pursuing this rezoning to B3 with a special use permit for increased density is that the Cherry Avenue zoning, although it's well documented in the Cherry Avenue small area plan that a grocery store is desired, it's not permitted by right. We also have some limitations on retail uses, medical clinics. Those are all limited to 4,000 square feet. So that also creates a severe limitation to this proposal that we're bringing before you. B3 offers a much greater flexibility, and I think with the proffer statement that we've presented, limiting height, requiring certain step backs of the building, and limiting particular uses in the B3, I think that we've really, proposed an urban form that kind of meets the intent of that Cherry Avenue district, but allows us to build some uses that we think the neighborhood really wants to see in this area. Some specific items that we would like your feedback on is parking. So in conjunction with the special use permit, we have requested some modifications to the parking standards in the zoning ordinance, and specifically the parking requirements for multifamily dwellings. We have requested to be able to provide residential parking consistent with the Cherry Avenue parking requirements, which is a half space per unit. And then for general retail and sales, which requires 3.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, we have requests to reduce that to 2.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area. And we've requested those reductions because we think that can work for this site, especially with the complementary nature of the users. So, Woodard Properties has been in conversation with Music Resource Center and Twice as Nice. Those hours of operation are often complementary with where, residents might be away at work. And so we're hoping that this can work out with a shared parking agreement and that we can just more effectively utilize the impervious surface on this site, especially more so than it is today, for sure. That is all that I have for you at the moment. We can go through a few more slides just to kind of run through the remainder of some items that we pulled from our application. So this is just showing the existing pedestrian connectivity network and how we're proposing to expand upon that by adding sidewalks in the area, increasing connections.
I think actually on that slide, the 5th Street sidewalk is currently continuous all the way down.
Yes, and it's like under our black. Oh, sorry, excuse me. We have 2 red dots that's shown it as. Thank you for that. We'll fix that. Next slide, please. And then you can see here, this is the massing diagram of the proposed buildings in the context of the neighborhood. Next slide. And just some additional massing angles. Great. Awesome. Well, that's all that we have for you, so we hope that we can have a good conversation with you all this evening about this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I see some suggested questions that we might consider. I'd like to, I guess, just do a round robin with each question, if that seems reasonable. I'm seeing some nods. First question, is B3 zoning appropriate for this location? And Mr. Duranzio.
Well, the answer to that question is, I don't know. However, I'll point out that it seems that we have been trying to move forward with something on this parcel since Commissioner Stolzenberg was 14, at least. And so I'm not really, I don't know if I can, if we need to stretch the usability there. I've been dragged into, I think, at least 2 prior attempts to make something happen on this property. The most robust one back in 2018. So And it's an odd property all the way around, from its elevations to its locations to its setback on the back on Fifth Street, where it's, with the two houses that are essentially on the property line. So if we need to move zoning around to make this work, I don't see why not, in general.
Thank you. Mr. Bob?
On the B3 zoning, I think it could be appropriate, yes. Especially when it allows us to do what we want to do.
Mr. Schwartz?
Yeah, I agree. We need to be able to get a grocery store on Cherry Avenue, if this is a way to do that. And, we can continue to restrict it through the proffers, then, I think it's a good idea. Good idea to consider.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
I think if there's a theme of tonight's agenda, it's that to get anything decent done in the city under the current zoning ordinance, you have to absolutely torture it to death. It's clear to me that this project couldn't happen in Cherry, which has some weird constraints and doesn't even allow SCPs to get around it. I think there are uses in B3 that wouldn't be appropriate. They've proffered out in their draft a lot of those. I haven't done a full check of the use matrix, but I think we can probably make it work.
Thank you. Mr. Palmer, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I agree. I don't think, with proffers, it can be appropriate.
As for me, there were many useful and important points in the Cherry Avenue Small Area Plan. One that hit me right between the eyes was we need a grocery store. I heard that very clearly. I'm very interested in whatever method gets us there, and I see public benefit in that. Mr. Payne, if you wish.
To answer the question of is B3 zoning appropriate?
If you wish.
Potentially.
Mr. Pinkston.
Yes, I think so. Given the proffers that have been mentioned, and I think that in general, this is a creative project, at least what we're seeing so far. It can meet the needs of, could be a good fit with that community, as well as a support for the nonprofits that are being mentioned, and would take a space that's quite blighted right now and not being used and do something, I think, remarkable and creative. So, yeah.
Thank you. Mayor Snook.
I think I knew the answer, but have since forgotten. What is the current expectation if we go with what we're now talking about for the zoning ordinance for this property?
CX3 right now?
Which would that permit essentially what's being discussed here, or?
It would be 3 by right, 5 with the bonus, which is not specified, but would probably mean more affordability.
Yes, I believe. Currently, what they're proffering is 5 units at 60% AMI or below for 6 years. And I believe under the new zoning ordinance, that would be 18 units at 60% AMI or below for 99 years.
I mean, I said the one thought I have is I've expressed this before, particularly with interest rates rising. If you do the present value calculation, once you start into affordability, getting out the 99 years doesn't cost you anywhere near as much as it sounds like it ought to. And there have been at least one time recently where we, at council level, basically insisted on 99-year affordability, and lo and behold, the developers apparently figured out that they could do that. I don't want to prejudge all of that stuff. I would say whether it's as B3 subject to all these proffers, or whether there is some other way to characterize things under what will be the new zoning ordinance. I do agree that getting to the point where there is where this grocery store is an important public benefit all by itself, and we ought to try to figure out a way to make it happen.
Turning back to the questions, the second question I have is a density of 87 dwelling units per acre appropriate at this location? Precisely 87. Mr. Duranzio.
Yes.
Mr. Habab.
think yes. The way we achieve it is something I'm interested in, massing wise. But.
Mr. Schwartz.
Considering we're getting rid of DUA in the new zoning code, I don't ever want to talk about it again. So yes, 87, 107, whatever.
Whatever.
It's-
Mr. Stolzenberg.
I agree. Massing, not DUA. Never want to hear it again.
Mr. Palmer, thoughts on DUA?
Yeah, I'm fine with that aspect. It really comes down to how you mitigate some of the traffic and provide good pedestrian amenities so you don't have to have a car there.
Thank you. As for me, yes, massing, not DUA, for sure. Mr. Payne.
If it at a minimum matched the draft inclusionary zoning ordinance requirements, then yes.
Yeah, I don't have any further feedback. I think what you all have said about massing versus DUA sounds like we're heading in the right direction.
Mayor Snook.
Same mantra.
I have a final question, and then we can just do whatever we wish. Are there any comments or suggestions the applicant should consider as they move forward with the SUP, the rezoning and SUP application? Potpourri, Mr. Duranzio.
Well, I think only in the context that Councilor Payne raised in the affordable housing and unit count and how we arrange it there to be comparable to what we're contemplating going forward, to consider that carefully. This sort of limited 6 years, for, X units for 6 years seems to be way over on the skim milk side. Other than that, I don't think I know enough to make other suggestions.
Mr. Above.
Hi. Really excited about seeing this. The program is fantastic. Sans the affordable housing component that could be better. Grocery stores much needed. Space for nonprofits. All of this happening right across a public amenity. More density next to the park is a good thing. My concerns are about boxing out the neighborhood that's there with the massing and finding a way to kind of massage the mass down to the neighborhood. Maybe I haven't really thought about it a lot, but that would be something I'd be looking at, and especially towards the rear, shadows, stuff like that it could cast on some of the homes right behind the property, which I think you're avoiding potentially by having a parking lot there, but something to keep in mind. And also the tightness of 6th Street right now. It's a pretty narrow one-way road, so how would, looking at how traffic can navigate through. But that's it for me.
Mr. Schwartz.
So I think, the applicant had asked about parking, and, I'm still of the camp that you let the developer figure out how much parking is required. I think this would be a good example of one that, if they could pull it off, they could promote more walkability in the, Cherry Avenue corridor. I think what we are talking about with this application is, so they are very much obviously not providing the affordable housing that we want. But I think what they're offering is a sort of trade. Do we get valuable nonprofit space in exchange for that? And I think when they come back to us, it would be great if they brought Twice as Nice and the Music Resource Center with them to try and, they can try and sell why are they valuable enough to replace affordable housing. And I think when you've got a trade-off in here where, like, if one of those nonprofit spaces isn't provided, you get 2 units, you'll end up providing 2 units for 6 years at, whatever the affordability rate is. You need to step that up. The trade-off should be much greater to get us closer to, if we don't get these nonprofits in here, you really do need to provide the minimum, I guess Councilor Payne said it was 18. Wherever that number is, you should provide that for 99 years to meet our future zoning code. it would be fantastic if there was some further reassurance on the grocery store, because I think that's what really sells this project. I don't know how you guys can achieve that, but that would definitely, I think, go a long way in making it much more palatable. So again, I think this is a trade that we're discussing, and I know we don't want to have PUDs or any sort of discretionary type processes in our future zoning code, but I just want to throw out there that this might be an interesting discussion to have in the future of, if an applicant has a way to meet the comprehensive plan, doing some sort of trade like this, is that something that we want to consider in the future? I think that's my ramble.
Excellent. Mr. Stolzenberg.
Yeah, my thoughts were very much along the lines of Commissioner Schwartz's. Well, first off, it would be 12, I think, right? It's 118 units max, so 10% would be 12. And we're looking at 5 for 6 years, potentially up to 9 without the nonprofit space. I think the nonprofit thing is an interesting and kind of unique case that raises some weird questions, right? Like, it's effectively affordable floor area, but for nonprofits, which is something we think is important. And, obviously makes the economics of the rest of the project work less well. And, how do you accommodate that in a rule-based way in the new zoning ordinance? I don't know. I mean, maybe the answer is just to have a discretionary opt-out mechanism for something like that. I don't know. I do think the nonprofit stuff is nice. I really am interested in the grocery use, and I know the neighborhood is too. I'd like to see some teeth behind the grocery use in the proffer, rather than just, we're going to hang it, leave it available for groceries until we get a CO. Have some consequences if you don't get a grocery in there. So I know that you're motivated to get a grocery in there, which I know you're trying to do, but, I think it's good to have assurances. Massing wise, I think it's actually pretty good with the 3 stories in the back by the existing homes. I would just mostly be worried about how you make that parking garage look good, more than smaller, just good. I don't know. The Darden parking garage is beautiful. I don't think anyone else in town has ever done it well. The Drossman isn't bad. Obviously, I don't particularly find parking garages good looking in the first place. I think that is about all I have.
Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, I think the massing is going to be important on this one, especially, and I think you can make it look really good from Cherry as you're going up 6th Street. I think that was that really long bar of a building. Breaking that up is going to be important. I guess the only other thing is, thinking about Cherry and its importance as a kind of corridor of moving people in and out of Charlottesville. I think that the traffic aspect of this is going to be, really key. And it kind of ties in with the work that's being done on the 5th Street corridor as well, especially at that intersection at Cherry and Ridge and whatever, Ridge McIntyre, whatever it's called up there, Elliott. So just, ensuring that traffic can flow smoothly through there. And I mean, the reason I'm focusing on traffic, because pedestrian stuff is really important too, but there's a lot of emergency vehicles that travel through that corridor because they can't really travel as well down Main Street. So, but yeah, I look forward to seeing this develop.
Thank you. For my own personal views, this is a difficult one. It's a complicated site. I don't think we're getting to perfect on this site, which is disappointing but understandable. I want to hit every target. That would be fantastic. I don't think that's mathematically possible or physically possible. I would be receptive to more height if it meant more affordability. I think that that's a reasonable trade-off, and that's a trade-off that I believe I understood in the Cherry Avenue plan. The grocery store, I believe, is very important. I was excited to see it in the proffer. I agree it's not the strongest language on that, but the grocery store is the main thing that I've heard, and just to get the parcel in use. It's been a long time. As far as really excellent parking garages, I'd like to praise the one at the School of Architecture. I think it's really a very nice parking garage. Check it out if you're in the market. Really good stuff. Mr. Payne.
Yeah, I will try not to ramble and be quick, but I'm sure I will. But I guess I share some of the other thoughts in terms of, we should keep in mind that there's no guarantees of a grocery store there, and the economics of making a grocery store work, we all know, are extremely difficult. And it's probably likely that to make the economics work, you're going to get a boutique, smaller grocery that's at a much higher price point. And I would just say, I think the affordability requirements are critical. And I would just say, if there's an opportunity to partner with a nonprofit to build deeply affordable housing, really, it would just be great to pursue that, because that's going to benefit people who aren't going to show up at these meetings, who are ignored often even in our conversations, single moms working full-time, $15, $20 an hour, families, people who desperately need housing that isn't being met in other ways. And from my memory of attending the Cherry Avenue small area plan events, what the neighborhood was crying out for, more than even a secondhand clothing store, was affordable housing. And I'm sure many people's reaction would be, we love that you're doing something creative. We know your intentions are good, and we're going to get these great amenities just in time for us to get priced out and displaced from the neighborhood. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Thank you. Mr. Pigston.
Yeah, I think that everything that's been mentioned, those are all reasonable points. I would be interested in more discussion about the possibility in the future of these sort of having a rules-based way of the trade-offs between affordable housing and what I think are two noble and good nonprofits. It is my understanding, and I think that y'all mentioned it, that you're working with a local nonprofit to try to figure out the housing, the affordable housing component. I understand the stack, I guess is the word they use to put the different types of financing together. I would like to see, obviously as much housing as we can get in there at a lower AMI. With the folks that I know that are working on this, there's a lot of creative, thoughtful minds, and I think that y'all will be able to figure out something that squares the circles that we're talking about. I think you're probably right, Michael, about the point about a grocery store. Everyone wants a grocery store. I think the economics of making that work, we're not going to ask the developer to subsidize a grocery store in perpetuity, but maybe there's a place for a nonprofit there, like Cultivate or some group like that could take a space like that. I don't know if it's appropriate, Chair, for a member of the Ficeville Neighborhood Association. They're here. I don't know if they'd be willing to speak to the project, but I think my sense is generally that the neighborhood is supportive of doing something creative at this site, and I think with the people that are involved, they'll be able to come up with a proposal that will meet most of the things that we're asking for.
Is there any objection to that?
Okay. You don't have to. I apologize for putting you on the spot.
You are most welcome if you wish.
I'm sorry. I figured you could handle it.
Hi, I'm Sarah Malpass. I'm the Vice President of the Neighborhood Association, and I think at this point I'll just echo a lot of what's been said by the developer. We have been in conversation with them, and we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of the conversations moving forward on the affordable housing piece, and we are certainly excited about the pieces of the plan that do match really well with the small area plan.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Mayor Snow, please.
I have three thoughts that have occurred to me while we've been talking here. The first thought is, and I'm going to be terribly presumptuous here because I repeatedly say I am not an architect, I'm not a landscape architect. But it seems to me that there's got to be a way to put a whole lot more trees on this parking lot. And what they're going to end up with otherwise, I mean, we talk about wanting to have at least 10% under tree cover, and what they're talking about here is maybe 3%, 4%. I mean, it's very, very few trees being shown. So I hope that that would be something that could be improved upon. The second concern, similar to what Michael suggested, is I think one of the things about grocery stores, like most things in the private enterprise system, is that if there's a way for it to make money, it's going to happen. And if it hasn't happened, maybe that's an indication that it's not a way for it to make money. Now, obviously, that situation may well change, and may particularly change if you've got 100 units of people living right above it who would need to patronize it. But I think we have to be conscious of the fact that there may be some strong headwinds against having a working grocery store there. One of the ways to make it possible for a grocery store to work there is to give the landlord some incentive to keep the rent on that grocery store low. And one of the ways to do that may be to build in an affordability component similar to, a commitment for X number of years, similar to what we're talking about for housing. I wouldn't necessarily suggest 99 years for a commercial sort of application, but certainly to a 10 or 15 or 20-year guarantee may be appropriate. I have a similar thought on the nonprofit space. If we're giving them various things in return for the fact that they're going to be giving some nonprofits a favorable break on the market, maybe that ought to carry with it a guarantee of a certain number of years as well. But those are issues that I'll throw those out there, and folks can figure out what the math looks like, and we'll see it eventually.
I think for the nonprofit space, they were talking about condoizing it and just selling it to them below market.
Well, that's true. That's true. Would it carry for the buyers? Would they have a similar obligation? I'm just thinking about, or I'm not even sure whether I care. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah. It raised an interesting question of whether there's an economic development department component of this. I mean, I know you guys had mentioned trying to get designated or, for various like grants or whatever, but like conceivably you can imagine we have all that money sitting in that economic development strategic initiatives pot. We could condoize the grocery store use and the city could own it and rent it to a grocery store below market if it's able to find one, because it might not be economically viable at market rents, but it might be economically viable at very low or no rents. Sorry to Chris Engel for spending his money.
It's important to help Mr. Engel think big. I'm sure he appreciates it. As far as parking, I see no issue with that. That seems reasonable to me. Further discussion on this item?
I'm wondering if the applicants have any more questions for us?
Please. Well, thank you very much.
I think.
Oh, please.
Oh, sorry. I think like if all these things we're talking about have trade-offs, right? Like they all have costs, and to some extent you can, have win-wins where you trade off a little bit of you get extra height, and height is scary, but that makes the economics work better. So, I think that's why this 5th floor makes sense. I don't even really think the front setback is super necessary, but, maybe you could add a 3rd floor to the IGA. I don't know if that's structurally feasible. I think if there's room for more trade-off by doing things like that to make the economics better, that would be great. And then, if not, right, like if we're asking too much and you can't make the numbers work, I think it might make sense. I know developers don't like to do this, but just show us those numbers, right? Like, convince us that that's the case, and then we'll have to reassess, how much we're asking for. Because it's easy for us to ask for everything.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question
Please.
of the developer? Why is it interesting to you all to keep the IGA building? It has never struck me as being a building that's terribly valuable.
It's not. I think there is an element of sustainability. We're using existing structures, which is in the comp plan. Also, it's less expensive. It saves costs. And I think overall, like, developable square footage on the project is limited by parking and also by utilities and easements that pretty much run down the center of the site. So trying to work within the existing footprint of that IGA store, which really works well with not having to relocate a lot of utilities that run through the center of that site.
Is the IGA building basically the cinder block?
It is.
Would it be strong enough to take a 3rd story?
I don't know.
I didn't know whether you had chosen 2 stories because you figured that was effectively the limit of what this would be structurally strong enough to do.
I think it is. We could verify that with our structural engineer. But we do know adding use to the property, we won't be able to park it. We won't have enough parking capacity on the project to add, more residential and commercial space.
And are you talking about parking requirements on the city's end, or your perception of what the amount you would need in terms of the market demand?
Yeah, I think it's market realities.
Yeah. Thank you.
Additional conversation on this item? Thank you very much. I think we're done with this. I would like us to speak for the trees.
Who speaks with trees?
Oh, joy and Inchmoot.
Were they expecting to come at midnight?
Very possibly, yes.
Oh, they're on the, oh, sorry.
The tree commission members are joining us virtually this evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Is the presentation being pulled up? Sorry.
guys
You go,
are
Peggy.
Very quiet. Is that on our end?
Is the presentation being pulled up?
We're having some audio issues. One moment.
Okay. Can you do it full screen?
I see a presentation. Can we get another audio check?
Yeah. Could you do it full screen instead of showing the computer?
We can see it full screen on our side.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for having us. I'm Peggy Van Yaries. I'm past chair of the Tree Commission. And so we also have Jeff Ayton here tonight, who is now our current chair.
Evening.
Good evening. Yeah. So I'm going to, we have 3 sections during the presentation. I'll do the first 2 and then Jeff will conclude. So, okay, let's have the next slide, please. So first we want to talk about the state of the forest, vision versus reality. Next slide, please. Our comprehensive plan, which you've recently adopted, has some goals that we'd like to live up to. And if you just let me read this one, it says Charlottesville will be an environmental leader with healthy air, water, and ecosystems, as well as ample, high quality, accessible open space, natural areas, and a preserved and enhanced tree canopy. Next slide, please. Well, the reality is that the city does not have preserved urban forest, nor are we enhancing it as quickly as we'd like. As we looked at our last tree canopy study, we can see that in 2004, we were at 50%. Today, we're at 40%. And what's a little bit more alarming, as you look at the graph again, it took us 10 years from 2004 to 2014 to lose 5% of our canopy, but then it only took us 4 years, 2014 to 2018, to lose another 5%. Next slide, please. So 10% loss from 2004 to 2018 is equivalent to 660 acres. And you can see what that looks like as it's put on a map of Charlottesville. Next slide, please. So here we are today. That's 5 years later from 2018. And we can project that we possibly lost another 5%. So we would be at 35%, which is the equivalent of 990 acres. And then you can see again how that grows, the loss of all those trees on our map of our city. Next slide, please. And also, our canopy study did a deeper dive into the neighborhoods. And we can see that all of our neighborhoods have declined except for 2. And we have 12 out of our 19 neighborhoods, which are below 40% canopy. 40% is a minimum goal where we'd like to be. And we also see that we have 8 neighborhoods below 30%. And 2, including 10th and Page and Star Hill, below 20%. Next slide, please. So what we have with this loss of canopy is worsening heat islands. I'm sure you've heard that term. It's neighborhoods that have low canopy. And what we find, what scientists have found, that trees with low tree cover have a higher incident of health and pollution-related diseases. In fact, we have some statistics on 10th and Page. The fire department's been collecting information about our different neighborhoods and risk assessments. And 10th and Page has some of the highest rate of heart attacks and asthma. 2 illnesses are related to heat. 10th and Page is also the hottest neighborhood in the city. And this was found out through some studies that 3C did. So next slide. So we did an experiment a year or so ago in September of 21. We wanted to see the heat effects. We went to Venable neighborhood, which is close to the 10th and Page. In fact, serves most of the kids in 10th and Page neighborhood. They have 2 playgrounds there. The one on the left is almost completely shady with mature shade trees. The one on the right is completely open, hot, next to a sidewalk and asphalt parking lot. We took the temperature there on the same day. The cool, represented by the blue thermometer, the cool playground was 82 degrees, and the hot playground with the red thermometer was 102 degrees. So we know that heat, and you can see nobody's playing on the hot playground. Heat affects our younger citizens and our elderly citizens the most. Next slide, please. So other goals that we try to do in the Tree Commission, we try to plant 200 trees a year. We haven't met that. This year, in 23, we are going to plant almost 170 trees, so we're getting better. Next slide. We try to plant shade trees mostly, and you can see that's in the green. And every year we are trying to plant more shade trees than we do small trees and ornamental trees. And a friend of mine just sent me an article today talking about shaded streets are so important in urban areas because people won't get out and walk unless their streets are shaded. So Jeff is going to talk about this later, but be careful about reducing setbacks, particularly to nothing, because we're going to have hot streets, not shady streets. Next slide, please. This year, or in 22, we planted mostly trees in the right-of-way. You can see on the graph, the right-of-way is sort of the teal color, and the green is the parks. We planted most of our trees over the last few years in right-of-ways and parks. But I think because of what we found out on Venable, that we really need to look at our school grounds and make sure they're shady, particularly where people gather or children play. So this year in 23, most of our trees are going to be planted on playgrounds and schools. Next slide. Thanks to you and to City Council every year, except for when COVID hit in 21, you've given us much more money for tree planting. We also appreciate the money that you've given before because of the ash trees removal. All of our ash trees are dying in the city except for those that are being treated. Next slide. So just to go through some primary activities the Tree Commission did last year until early this year. Next slide. We have 3 acting committees. One is the Education Advocacy Committee. And some of the important things we've done, we've tried to improve the Tree Commission's website. We've advocated for more funding, and you've been very gracious. We prepared with our urban forester a downtown mall tree management plan, which is about to go out asking for proposals. This is very important because, as you know, these trees are about 45 years old. They've done amazingly well, but many of them are reaching older age. And just like all of us, we need a little more tender care. So this management plan will help us how we can keep these trees living as long as possible, but also how are we going to replace them and with what kind of trees. So also we participated, I'll tell you a little bit more about tree planting at 10th and Page, and we've begun to develop some educational material too. Next slide. So our Arbor Committee really does more hands-on things with trees. Last year at Clark School, and that's Steve Gaines, our urban forester, we planted a tree thanks to J.W. Townsend. And we had kids outside teaching them about trees, and you can see they got very excited. This committee also works with Steve to decide where to plant trees. We worked with the Department of Utilities for a tree giveaway program they did this year and last year. And we've begun discussions with PHA on Friendship Court to try to preserve as many as those wonderful oak trees that border that neighborhood. Next slide. Our Codes Committee, I think, as you know, you've heard from them a lot this year, is going to be and has been looking at the rewrite of the zoning ordinance. We've commented on the critical slope and the climate action plan. We also consult, particularly Steve does, with tree preservation in neighborhoods. And you've heard us comment on many development projects. Next slide. Now, we told you last year about a program that the Tree Commission helped to initiate, and the Nature Conservancy here in town has helped fund us. It's called Release Seaville, and we want to particularly improve the health of our low canopy neighborhoods with more trees, more shade. And we'll do this by planting trees, preserving trees, and educating kids and families about the importance of trees and nature in the city. So next slide. Some of the important things that Relief did last year in the spring, and we're going to do it again this year. We'll invite you to it. We had an environmental career fair where we had over 30 vendors from nonprofits and people from the green industry, because we want to teach kids the importance of trees and nature, but also tell them about all the jobs that are possible in the green industry. Next slide. So last summer, we had our Green Team Ambassador Program. We worked with the City of Promise. We had 10 children, not children, teenagers, many of them from 10th and Page. We taught them about tree care. We taught them about climate change. We taught them how to knock on doors in their neighborhood and asking people if we could plant a tree. So next slide, please. So then after they actually helped us, they went out in the neighborhood with a knowledgeable tree person. They knocked on doors. Some of them were very nervous, but by the end of the day, they were wonderful. And they convinced, I'm sure of it, they helped us convince that we were able to plant 39 trees. At the same time, we worked with C3s and they handed out literature to the homeowners about how they could make their homes more energy efficient. And so many times we heard neighbors say, you know, this is the hottest tree in the city. This is the hottest neighborhood in the city. And so we were glad we were able to plant a number of shade trees near sidewalks, hoping to make this a shadier neighborhood. Next slide. So I think this is where you take over, don't you, Steve?
Jeff, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Nice to see you all tonight. So this section, which is 5 or 6 slides, we'll talk a little bit about what the city can do for the urban forest. So next slide, please. And part of that is to support some of the goals that have been defined in the comprehensive plan. In particular, we wanted to pull this one out, that they're a request to require the zoning changes, preserve and enhance natural resources and sensitive environmental areas, designated floodplain areas, steep slopes, rivers, and streams. So that comes directly from the comp plan, and asking that, you know, as we think about zoning and development within the city, that we keep this goal in mind. Next slide, please. So some of the things that the Tree Commission is recommending for the zoning rewrite, and I think you've also seen some of the comments that have come through from us on the module 1. But in general, the main objectives would be that there are increased requirements for planting new trees and of course, protecting existing trees. What we've come to understand is that, you know, a newly planted tree typically is fairly small, and it's going to take a good long time for it to grow to the point where it has a mature canopy and provides the shade that we would ideally see in an urban environment. So preserving existing trees that are already at scale and already providing that canopy is pretty key to the work of keeping our city livable. Also establish consequences for the public tree damage and incentives for saving those trees. So trees that are in the public right of way, it seems like it's really important for us to figure out ways to keep that canopy intact, and to penalize developers or others if those trees have to come out, to the point where some of those payments can go into a tree fund that can further support planting within the city or preserving and maintaining the tree canopy that we already have. One request here, which is certainly a conversation piece, I'm sure, is to eliminate the no setback waivers, and that would, you know, in essence, if you provide no setback, there really is no place to put street trees. And having canopy over the places where people walk, as Peggy noted, and even over roadways, reduces that heat island effect that she was talking about. And then, of course, encouraging new development, as we saw in that Cherry Street Ave presentation tonight, on degraded land or brownfield sites is much better than pushing it towards the greenfield. And then again, do not increase density on forests and other environmentally sensitive lands. Next slide, please. So I think one other question we have for you all, and as we talk about you know, new developments within the city, is a desire from the Tree Commission, I think others in the community, to protect critical slopes and to think about these forests that we have that are intact and that provide habitat and provide recreation for the community are preserved. And one of the ways to do that is to not approve critical slope waiver developments. And so that's something that we have put out there as a request. Just 3 approved projects this past year are set to remove over 30 acres of mature forest. So we're seeing significant pressures on the urban forest within the city, and we'd like to request that those are reviewed and questioned to the degree that they can. And that, now this third bullet point is to really strengthen those critical slope ordinances and other environmental ordinances now. And then also the fourth one here is to think about including environmental assessments of large developments in sensitive areas. And we've already heard a little bit from Steve Gaines about this, of talking about, how do we preserve our soils? How do we preserve our waterways? How do we preserve our forests? It's not just a question of trees and tree canopy, but it's a question of the entire environment. Next slide, please. We've put forward some requests to council, and we hope those move forward in the next year, and we'll see what comes of those. Some of this is work for preservation and replacement of the downtown mall trees. One of the premier landscapes of the city that is in need of our help and care as it moves into hopefully the next number of decades. Next slide, please. And then, some things that we've put forward and have started to talk about, and as we think about supporting Parks and Recreation and Steve and Rion and others that they work with, is to really encourage integration between Parks, NDS, and Public Works, to have Steve available to review plans and to be present for, conversations that need to happen relative to preserving environmentally sensitive spaces within the city. And then perhaps requiring a person from Environmental Sustainability Department to attend the Tree Commission meetings, having their input and being a part of that process could be quite helpful. And then even thinking about a new staff member potentially that could be this creation of a natural resources manager who could help facilitate these environmental assessments and site plan review and other things that happen within the city. Next slide. And then I think this is maybe the final one, or maybe there's one more after that, is to think about either the Tree Commission or an expansion of the Tree Commission's mission, or an integration of the commission with perhaps another commission that could be this natural resource commission that could really talk about some of the things that we have talked about tonight relative to air quality, soil quality, wildlife habitat, trees and plants, places for people to recreate, clean water, et cetera, those things that really draw people to Charlottesville as a city. And then the last slide really just says, we appreciate everything that Steve and Rion and others are doing at Parks and Rec, and working with you all to really try and preserve the tree canopy and expand it as possible. And knowing too that Peggy noted the development on Garrett and 2nd Street, and that having good tree canopy is not in conflict with affordable housing and with development in the city. It just has to be done well. And this was one of our Tree Commission members took this picture of a poster that a Crescent Hall resident put up talking about how much they love trees. So on that note, we're done, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Any issue with the, commissioners, any questions on this, council? Thank you very much. Next item I see is titled Zoning Ordinance. My understanding is that we have nothing prepared, but if you want to talk zoning ordinance, this is a good time to do it.
Chair, I had a question, sorry, about just the previous presentation, now that I'm thinking about it. What would be the process to get a natural resource manager or another commission? Where does that move to? I just don't know.
I also don't know, but I'm looking at Ms. Creasy. Do you know?
Well, this presentation was provided to council before it came to the commission, so that may be something that they contemplated. I'm not sure that they did. But, I mean, there's always possibilities.
We can always hope.
Ms. Stolzenberg?
Sorry, that's not on that topic, so if anyone has
Which-
something to say on that.
Which topic?
Kareem's.
Oh,
No,
I
to,
see.
to answer your question, it would
Please.
be part of the budget process. In my mind, the first step would be including it in the budget. So, and
Budget.
my understanding, it is not currently in the budget.
Thanks.
I should add, I had looked at a number of models of other jurisdictions. For example, I think it's Fairfax County that has what they call an environmental commission or environmental committee that is that has a. I'm not quite sure what its mandate is, except to go forth and be liberal on environmental things. And I was thinking about it in terms of, personally, I was thinking about it in terms of sort of sustainability and having some group that would kind of be the citizens committee that would own the sustainability plan and would own the climate action plan. That's a little bit different from the notion of an environmental committee or a resources committee or something like that. But one of the things that I've observed over many years in this area is that if there isn't some group of citizens and some entity within government that feels a sense of ownership for a plan, it doesn't get owned. It doesn't happen by itself. And maybe the thing to think about is what kind of a group would we want to constitute that would take an ownership interest in the sustainability plan and climate action plan, something like that. Again, a little bit different from the natural resources field, but that's some of the thinking that I've at least been doing. And I mentioned it to Mr. Rogers, and of course this being budget season, he's a little distracted. It wasn't so much from a sense that, hey, it's got to be in the budget, as much as talk to me after the budget is done.
Yeah, and I was referring, one of the other recommendations is an additional staff position. That's what I was referring to.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, so more generally on the tree canopy. So I guess I've just been trying to get a sense of what's driving the reduction in tree canopy. You know, 990 acres is a big number, right? Like in a city that's like 6,500 acres or so. I mean, well, as you said, it's 15%. And I just say I've been trying to like figure out where it's been happening. And I got kind of a rough map from the Planet Geo consultants that did the study, but it wasn't really enough for me to understand why it's happening, right? So like take the 330 acres of loss in that 2014 to 2018 period. Of all the developments I could find in that period, they totaled about 49 acres total. And I don't know if they were all canopy before or not. I got the shape files and imagery, and I've been spending a lot of time zooming in and out and toggling the layer on and off. But I'm very much not a geospatial analysis person. And so I guess the question is, like, or the request maybe is, I would really appreciate more of a deep dive into where we're losing canopy and why that canopy is going away. Because to me, like, I can certainly see that development is a part of that. You know, you look at Lachlan Hill in this imagery, and it's like a gash in the landscape, and same with the YMCA, and then, you know, some by right cul-de-sacs over by Prize Spring, but it's not the full story, it seems, and actually it's only a part of the story. So I guess my question for you guys is, do you have a sense of what's causing the rest of that loss and how we can kind of stanch that bleeding? Or, you know, do you guys have someone with the geospatial chops to dig in? And, you know, how do we get to the root of the problem, if you'll pardon the tree pun, and really understand what's happening?
Peggy, do you want to speak to that, or would you like me to?
Well, Jeff, you're the president. I thought maybe you
Yeah.
could.
The chair, sure.
The chair.
Well, I think part of what we're looking at is an old data set. And so we do need a new data set to really understand exactly what's going on in the city at the present moment. The report that you referenced, Rory, that you know, it's from 2022, but it's based on a data set that is 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So we need that updated, and we've talked about that needing to happen in this next year. What that does state in its executive summary is that some of this tree loss is due to development, but it's also due to some work that was done in the city on stream restoration. So specifically the Meadow Creek stream restoration took out a fair number of trees. Many of those have been replanted and are growing back, and we're seeing significant growth, certainly through the Greenbrier Park area and towards Hydraulic Road. So there are areas that were denuded at that time and that now are going to see regrowth. So, you know, that probably, you know, if we took that out of the equation, what else are we seeing? And they note in the executive summary that there are, you know, parcels, private parcels that were affected by that restoration work, and then the rest of it is development. So I don't think we can really shy away from the notion that development does have a hand in you know, tree canopy loss, but it can also have a hand in restoring tree canopy.
Yep.
And that's a key part of planning, right?
So yeah, I guess I've been confused about why the data, like why do a study in 2022 on 2018 imagery rather than newer imagery, especially since presumably that imagery exists because next time we would do it on 2022 imagery or whatever. So like, is there a reason for that lag? And did you say we're going to get a new study based on more recent imagery sooner than that 5-year cadence we've been doing them on?
Well, I think the desired, Peggy, correct me if I'm wrong, you know a little bit more of the history here, but I think in this next year, 2024, the city would put out a request for that canopy study to be redone.
Cool. I think that would be very useful.
Roy, if I can't answer your question completely, but I know that when it was done in 2021, there was a lot of discussion about technical discussion, which was beyond me, of what year they could use. And for some reason, they had to use 2018 because of what was done in 2014. It's partially explained why in the canopy study. Again, I can't remember exactly, but it had some technical reason. We certainly didn't want to go back to 2018, but they had to. But that's why it's important, I think, to now in 23 or 24, because we're 5 years out, look at it again.
Yep. Great. Thank you. And agreed.
Additional questions or discussion on this item? A thought I had just in terms of things that the Tree Commission can do. I find the budget recommendations very helpful. One thing that we've talked a lot about is sort of forested areas of especially high importance, which I don't know what those are. But knowing what those are, I think would be of help to the Commission and possibly of help to the city in terms of buying park space. Apologies if this already exists.
It's not a full answer to your question, but I think we do have some, like the Rivanna River Urban Corridor Plan is not directly tree canopy alone, but kind of connects to that. That's one that comes to mind.
Right, yeah, Michael, and makes recommendations about potential parkland or purchases. That could be expanded. I mean, I think there's some pockets that would give access to neighborhoods that don't currently have access to forested areas. That could be an interesting way to, to propose on new, smaller parkland. We'd be happy to make recommendations for new parkland within the city.
Thank you. Additional
Sure.
comments or questions on this item?
I guess I'd just say, remind council that we recommended the invasives request be fully funded.
We're having a little trouble hearing Rory online.
Sorry, I took turn the mic off. Remind council, I'm pretty sure we recommended that the invasives study be or the invasives effort reduction combat be funded, and I don't think it is in the current draft. So I just want to beat them over the head with that a little bit and remind them to keep that in mind as you go through your CIP discussions.
Any additional questions?
Is that a CIP issue, or is that an operating budget issue?
It was a CIP item, I believe. Yeah, it was in the
Yes.
unfunded list.
Additional comments or questions on this issue? Thank you very much. Let's talk zoning ordinance if we wish to.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Freese, do you have something to say about zoning ordinance? I feel like you've said it.
The one thing we can circle back to is something Carl mentioned earlier, is where do we have the wiggle room to have something that's not a PUD but allows us to weigh some different things and make things happen that aren't inherent in the zoning code.
Technically, maybe this is all a Module 3 issue, but I mean, like, I think the way the county seems to do it is, like, they have a lot of these rules, and then they have, like, special exceptions to the rules, which are, like, maybe less strenuous or onerous than SUPs, but, like, gives you that added flexibility to say, hey, like, this rule doesn't really make sense in this context. I don't know if that's something you guys are thinking about.
All I can say at this point is I wrote down the comment and I wrote underneath it, it's either a special exception process or you're creating more options that become kind of a menu of by right options. The problem with the menu of by right options is we'd really have to study and really understand how they weigh against each other, because you could very quickly see someone say, oh, look, this retail space for a short period of time is the cheapest way to go. Right, and we'll have a whole bunch
Grocery
of
store in every
vacant,
building.
cheap retail space all around the city that goes away after 15 years, and so from that perspective, probably if this is something that the commission and ultimately the council is interested in pursuing, we would probably look at a special exemption option. So those are the notes that I took after the comment was made.
A question about, just some of the smaller regulations that are in our zoning code, like some of the form-based stuff. Is that going to have to go to the BZA if someone
No, so what we're
finds they can't do it?
proposing is a limited leeway that would be approvable under the zoning administrator. That shows up, as we've noted, in Module 3, and is something that we're discussing with our legal attorney, make sure we're within the bounds of what is allowed. But yeah, minor wiggle room is being considered in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
We already have a little bit more flexibility in the node zones, which are intended to kind of have a lot of programming options. Would there be maybe a different sort of thought in terms of nodes versus everywhere?
What do you mean by that? In uses?
Yeah, exactly. Is there a greater need or a greater opportunity to balance different options there?
I mean, I think it might be worthwhile to go through the use matrix in detail and see what might make sense to have by SUP. I certainly had some that, like, for the R zones would probably have made sense at least by SUP, right? Like, you can have food and beverage in some, but not the accessory alcohol or outdoor dining. So you couldn't have, like, an alfresco cafe situation with a couple tables outside. You can't have a yoga studio, which I feel like is pretty low impact. I don't know why that's a standalone use.
It's too woke.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I hate to have a lot of SUPs and open up the door for there to be a ton of those, but like, if it's something that isn't like outright unreasonable to have in a zone, it seems better to have it by SUP than ban completely. Or we're just gonna get a whole bunch of CTAs to add them by SUP like we did with drive-throughs and highway a few years ago.
Other thoughts on this issue or zoning generally?
I was just saying, I mean, you guys were grumbling in the hallway about, we were all kind of, I stepped into it, what we're doing next 2 weeks from now.
Yes, which is zoning related.
Yes.
Please.
Shoot. Part of this is, I haven't gotten my act together to send you my comments yet, but I am wondering if there might be some time to discuss Module 1 again with some of those, if collectively we can send you comments ahead of time, as opposed to just rehashing Module 2. And
We're all here at your pleasure, so if you guys want to have another conversation about Module 1, we can figure that out, and we'll do it.
I guess part of the worry is that we aren't gonna be able to usefully discuss Module 2, given that we'll only get it that morning.
Yeah, so I totally acknowledge that. And so yeah, we're gonna have to build in an opportunity for another discussion. Again, we can make use of that time to present what's there, particularly the more complicated aspects of it, like inclusionary zoning. We could split that time and use some of it for Module 1. I mean, I'm more than happy to.
Is it too late to just move the day? Make
I
it
mean,
Thursday, give us a day, or?
I mean, it would seem that if you're shooting for that morning, that you have essentially said, I'm going to hit the bullseye with this, I really, really mean it, if it's going to have any impact on our discussion that night. Well, I mean, not that I don't think you're great at darts, but things happen.
You haven't seen me play darts.
Well, maybe you're lousy at darts. You know, I don't have an opinion on that.
So,
it just seems that if it gets pushed back by a day, then we're standing around, you know, because something has happened. We're standing around with no opportunity to look at that, and we're essentially committing to, we're going to do another session on Module 1, which I'm okay with, but that still leaves us with the Module 2 issue.
yeah.
I'm guessing if they push it back by a day or 2 days or 3 days, you're still gonna know what's in it, for the most part. I would appreciate that. I mean, you mentioned explaining the more difficult parts to us. I would appreciate that.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about pushing it back 1 day to the 30th, there's a council work session on the budget
Yeah.
that evening.
Right.
I think Phil was mentioning more like if the release date gets pushed back, but we keep our work session.
Oh, I see.
But I still think that you'd be able to share some valuable information with
We
us.
would, I have no doubt we would still be able to share some valuable information. And we can look at the schedule. I admit this has been a bit of a moving target for us over the last few days. And so we're looking ahead at our schedule and figuring out what other adjustments we need to make, and we can come back and talk about those further as we go forward. But again, you know, if there are topics that you all would like to cover in that work session and subsequent work sessions, if we would want to talk about scheduling additional work sessions, we're all ears. So let's figure out what that needs to be.
Mr. Mitchell, please.
Forgive me for being a little late, but I made it. I think there would be great value in talking about the changes that you guys recommended last meeting sooner rather than later. So if we can make half of that meeting focus, you know, on their recommendations, I think that'd be good. The other point I want to make, and I'm guessing that Ms. Van Yerries mentioned it, or if she didn't mention it, Mr. Bob mentioned it, is we need to be very thoughtful about setbacks as it relates to what it's going to do to our tree inventory. There are going to be places where, you know, there were trees today that aren't going to be there anymore because of the reductions in setbacks that we've been recommending to I would just ask if you guys didn't already talk about this, that we'd be very thorough, Ms. Van Yeris may have, because she's in my ear every day about it. I recommend that we be very thoughtful about the setbacks as well. But you're good with doing splitting the meeting to talk about.
Yeah, I guess I think there's a lot of value in having another Module 1 work session to talk about setbacks of several kinds, to talk about uses, to talk about map changes. My one caveat would be that I probably have more map changes to recommend that beyond the boring ones that I think were my 2 years ago ones. And I know Carl and also I have more comments that we haven't really written up. In my case, partly because I have it spread across 3 different media because I was reading this zoning code in a bunch of different places. And we'd have to get our act together by 2 weeks from now. Can you do that?
Earlier than 2 weeks from now. I think we need to,
That would be
I need to
fair.
get you stuff this weekend. That would be my goal.
Yeah, I can try.
I've got everything typed up. It's just
Forced
kind
to,
of, it's a big laundry list of stuff, and I feel like it needs to be organized a little better. But it's got every code section next to it at least.
I'm just gonna send you a laundry list of stuff and not organize it, but put it in one medium handwritten email.
I appreciate you not photographing your little notebook there and sending me those images.
If things written down like micro producer CX3, I don't even know what that means. I have no idea what I was intending.
Use in that category, like.
Yep, something with that. Did we ban it? Did we allow it?
Carl, if you've got section numbers, you're in good shape. You can hit send.
All right. I do need to, actually what I need to do is look at the, I haven't looked at the first section that's got the setbacks and everything for each zone. I do want to go through that, but I went through all the text.
All right, I'll try to get my act together then. If he's going to.
I didn't make any promises, but that's what I need to do. It's we should tell Jeff not to make the BAR applications that difficult for next week.
So also for Module 1, the consultants are gathering and putting information together. All 3 modules are in different spots at different, it's chaotic. But for the public workshops that we're going to be preparing for Module 2 and Module 3, one thing that is supposed to come from that is for Module 1 to have, these are the areas that are being looked at for update. They're not going to have the update for Module 1 posted until we get through all the modules, and then they're going to have a combined, put-together document. We provided, from our last work session, we provided all of that information, the decision points that you all put forth, as well as the land use change information. And so they're going to be putting that into a document that comes out with Module 2 that says, here are the things that we're looking at for updates for Module 1. So just kind of an FYI that all of these processes are overlapping. And so, it's a little bit complicated. And so in order to minimize confusion by having multiple drafts of one out there, that document's going to serve as a overview.
From the steering committee meeting and from my own understanding, vehicle storage would be very helpful to spend some time on. We certainly hear a lot about it.
Yeah. But that'll mostly be a Module 2 thing.
Module 2.
Which is what we're talking about.
Right.
Could fill an hour with that discussion.
Additional zoning ordinance, ideas, concerns?
Could I
Please.
ask a process question? I have been concerned, certainly was concerned during the discussion of comp plan and plum and everything else, and to a certain extent this as well, that from council's perspective, the way it seems to, the way the process seems to have been constructed is that we are basically expecting to receive a baked cake. And that makes me very uncomfortable because there will have already been a whole lot of discussions and a whole lot of compromises that take place before it comes to us officially. And I remember having the sense when the future land use map came up that nobody else, or there was very little interest on council's part in getting back into the weeds of the things that everybody else had already worked on. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I sent you the rather detailed list of questions I did yesterday, and I appreciate your answer. I haven't mastered it yet, but I'll figure that out. But I'm wondering whether there is, and you know, we had the meeting a few weeks ago at which we received really and heard for the first time any discussion of Module 1, and I would hope that all of us have since had a chance to familiarize ourselves more. I would appreciate having an opportunity for counselors to participate in a broader discussion, module by module, rather than waiting until the entire cake has been baked and brought to us.
Sure, and I think that was the intention in bringing these joint meetings together, but are you asking for, or suggesting a separate process? Again, I'm open to whatever it takes, because I appreciate.
If you're about to have, if you're about to take the meeting for March 29th and make it into a new discussion of Module 1, I'll come with all of my questions and issues
Sure.
on Module 1 at that time. But I think we need to be clear with counselors to let them know that that's the plan.
Yeah.
Because when I've talked to other counselors, that I get a number of reactions. One is, I haven't really focused on the nitty-gritty yet because it hasn't come. And then on the other hand, when it does get there, there's no opportunity to get our hands dirty really again. So it's a process that makes me uncomfortable overall, and maybe the best way to deal with it is to say, let's have the meeting on March 29th with counselors and Planning Commission as a work session, and if we can make it about Module 1, then, you know, for example, a lot of my questions dealt with whole rate of change analysis, and yeah, and I watched the presentation from the steering committee 3 times now to try to derive as much as I could from it, but I've still got more questions, some of which I think you addressed. Those are the kinds of things that as I talk to people, for example, as I was talking to people in front of the boards as we were all up here a few weeks ago, they had many of the same questions, and I just think we ought to have a more public discussion of some of those questions now that everybody's had a chance to sort of delve into it and really come up with the questions. So, March 29th would be a great time to do that as far as I'm concerned. When we talk about Module 2, that's another issue. But.
Perhaps a combination of the two is some of those questions for Module 1 and then the overview of Module 2 that provides the highlights so that once you all dig into the details.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we talked about in the moment, is that the silver lining is it offered an opportunity to do more of an introduction of Module 2. So again, we can take it as a Module 1 discussion and an introduction of Module 2, which if we allow each of these conversations, we've been figuring about 2 to 3 hours and hitting 3. We can limit the introduction part to an hour or less and allow a good couple of solid hours of Module 1 discussion again. And ultimately, I mean, and it pains me to say so, there isn't really a hard deadline on this except one that we impose on ourselves.
Right.
So.
And yeah, I guess question maybe I have is like, how packed do we think our next regular meeting agenda will be? Like, will we have time for a longish discussion there?
Potentially. So the Cherry Avenue has pushed back from the projection that you have right in front of you. We do have the presentation on the transportation updates and JPA at the moment, as well as a hearing on CDBG and home, and that's a time contingent. We usually set the agenda or get as close as we can a couple days after this meeting, but we usually have a handle on the public hearing. So I'm hoping we remain in this range of items.
Seems relatively short, even though there's a few things. Not the most controversial.
Additional questions or comments about the zoning ordinance? Please.
There's obviously no answer needed now, but something I'm curious to get the Planning Commission's thoughts on with Module 2 and 1, kind of both of them, is one, reviewing the methodology for how we determined the sensitive areas overlay. Quite frankly, that's just something I've forgotten what methodology we've used. And then two, that kind of setting the stage for a conversation of, are there any parcels we may have missed? Because just reviewing it, it seems like there's at least a couple that have a high percentage of low-income renters where without the sensitive overlays, we could very much be creating a risk of displacing those residents. I'm less concerned about a change of like zoning districts and what's allowed under them than if there's any parcels we just missed out with whatever methodology we use for sensitive communities. And I don't know a good way to systematically do that. So I've just found parcels that I know we emailed about it, but I've just kind of like, there's parcels I'm familiar with, and like, that's not a very good systematic way to do that.
We just use census data. So it's census blocks, which is as high res as census blocks.
Block groups.
I mean, there's, if you open up the comp plan and click on the land use chapter, it'll take you, there's a page that describes the process for identifying the sensitive community areas. That might be a good starting point, but it does look at block groups. And then the other thing is that sensitive community areas as designated was looking at the general residential, and I think it was just general residential, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you and I have talked, some of the parcels you're interested in are beyond that, and so that's an additional conversation.
Yeah, and my point with the methodology is, was that methodology expansive enough when we look at it again?
Yeah, and I do recall we had not quite an amendment, or maybe it was an amendment, but we voted in favor of some sort of resolution or desire introduced by Commissioner Dowell to take a closer look at that and see if we can get, more fine-grained than the block group detail, either based on rigorous methodology like census stuff, which would be difficult, or like just kind of local knowledge and awareness of where boundaries might make sense to be tweaked. So I have something for you with regard to medium. But yeah, I mean, some of the parcels you're talking about are like higher than that even. And
right. And I'm just, again, I'm not talking about changing what's allowed in zoning districts, but I think we really need to take this seriously.
Would that require additional action from the Planning Commission or the council to initiate?
You're not
So-
initiating anything. We're all,
Right. Yeah,
we're all
no.
in this larger discussion, so it can be part of current discussion.
Yeah.
And was the sensitive question a module 2 thing or a module 3 thing? That's 2, okay.
Yep.
So you're
You're going to have
on
something
this.
for us on the 29th.
I am.
All right.
We are,
Guess
I
we
should
can
say.
start there.
The ones that have jumped out to me are Woolen Mills, Meadows, and Venable, just broadly. Any other conversation, concerns about zoning ordinance? I think perhaps other people might be as tired as me. It's possible. I would also entertain a motion at this time.
Well, Chair, I can provide a motion.
Please.
So I call everyone's attention to the date, which is March 14th. I have not rummaged around in the congressional record to find out what, if it's official this day or that day. There are two unofficial holidays that are attached to it. One is not appropriate to discuss in this forum at all. You can Google it. The second is, of course, Pi Day. And I had planned to bring some accoutrements for that to this meeting, but my day went sideways. But as it is Pi Day, I would like to call the Commission's attention to House Bill number 267, as introduced into the 1897 legislature of the state of Indiana, which was an attempt to gain royalties by coming up with a scheme for squaring the circle. I won't go into the details of squaring the circle, but it has to do with the areas of circles and squares and measuring them. And it is impossible using common Euclidean geometry to make those two things work because pi is an infinite number. But there was a bill submitted to try to square the circle that ended up having pi being equal more or less to 3. It went forward into the legislature. And it was first assigned to the Committee of Finance, and then the Speaker, on a motion, moved it into the Committee on Swampland, where it could, quote, find a suitable grave. Didn't happen. Discharge petition happened, and it passed. The legislation in the Senate, it was looking as if it was going to be going forward, but one senator did point out that he didn't understand how one could change the theorems and maxims of mathematics by fiat in a legislative body. And so it failed by one vote. So Indiana still acknowledges, although they do weird things with daylight savings time, they do acknowledge that pi is 3.14159, et cetera. I call this to your attention because we should use our own due caution in attempting to legislate the impossible. I would also point out that tonight is the eve of the Ides of March, and those of us who are in the business of public policy need to be very careful walking through doorways and such. And therefore, we should adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
A2, Phil.
Yeah. A2, Loite.
Second.
I hear a second. Can I get some acclamation? Ayes or nays?
Aye.
Aye.
Goodbye.
Good night all. Thank you very much.